From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
We got to the moon the first time.
We definitely went to the moon. Yes, we went to the moon. We didn't go to the moon. We went to the moon several times.
Right. Oh, I just want to check your view on that.
We 100% went to the moon. I know in depth the technical designs of the rockets, the spacecraft, everything.
Yes.
What went right, what went wrong. It was a remarkable piece of technology, like incredible piece of technology to go to the moon in '69. That was like reaching into the future and pulling the future forward dramatically. And it was an important ideological battle with communism. They couldn't put a person on the moon, and capitalism could.
All right. Well, now that we have all of this historical context, it's time to understand the end game, because we are indeed at the end. The book of Revelation in chapter 13 talks about a second power, a beast, that comes out of the earth and basically works false signs and wonders and miracles to eventually get people to build an image, which is a representation of the first beast. The first beast was a religio-political power. Of course, that's the papacy, ruling over the former Roman Empire in Europe, with all of the kings pledging their obedience to the Pope and that whole system. The false prophet deceives the world into building a representation, basically a representative government, a copy of this type of government, and pledging their allegiance to the beast once again. This is the role of the false prophet. Now, if all of this is kind of over your head, it seems new information, whatever, I talk about it quite a bit in my End Time series. We break it down in a very detailed way there, very straightforward. Lots of evidence, lots of current events to show you all of these things being fulfilled in our time. And of course, the second beast is the false prophet, but it is the United States. And there are many videos on it. In fact, my recent Venerable Day of the Sun, number 5, as of the time of this video at least, who knows how many more by the time you watch it, but the Venerable Day of the Sun, number 5, it looks like a lamb. That's a great episode also to show you proof upon proof upon proof that the United States is the false prophet. So many things have come out of the United States to deceive the world into ultimately worshiping the beast and coming into this mindset, this mystery religion manifesting itself into the world mindset. And that's what this is all about. Now, I wanted to devote a special section to NASA because ultimately there are many deceptions, like I said, that have come out of the United States, but none of them stand out in the world of cosmology like, of course, NASA does. NASA is very famous and infamous for their shenanigans and tricks, and so as we did with quantum sorcery, as we did with the gaslighting of relativity, also we're going to focus on NASA and its many false signs and wonders to basically deceive you into ultimately worshiping the beast. Now, the question is, how is that happening? And you saw from the section on 1900s to the modern times that things like the moon landing, for example, were integral in shaping the idea of a new world order through climate change, through the that report by the Club of Rome, I forget the name now, Limits to Growth, through Earthrise, through hippies and earth worship and the resurgence of basically pantheism. All of these things that have come out that have now been given scientific authority and weight because of NASA, which of course these things are just illusions. Nobody ever went to the moon. You can't go to the moon. You're going to learn that today. But hopefully you already know that. Either way, the point is that because people believed in science as an objective authority, this is how their spell was cast. The spell works because you believe in it. It doesn't have power in and of itself. You need to understand this. That the reason magic and delusions and spells work is because you believe in it. That they get you to believe in what they're doing, and therefore they can subsume you and have power over you. So you have to break the spell by seeing through the illusion. And once you do that, they don't have any power over you. So the spell that NASA cast, one of them, one of many, with the moon landing, was to make people believe that, yes, there is outer space. We're on this lonely little planet. And what does that mean? Well, therefore, limits to growth, climate change, asteroids might get us. We need to have a worldwide asteroid defense league, and all of these things that have created an echo chamber to ultimately point you back to Rome as the moral authority that needs to take control of the world. Otherwise, we're just going to lose ourselves. And this is how the false prophet has served the beast. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are talking about quote-unquote flat earth stuff, this is not a flat earth presentation, but who are in that sphere, no pun intended, do not point you to this ultimate truth, that NASA is part of the false prophet. And of course, the goal of NASA being part of the false prophet is to help deceive you into ultimately accepting Rome. That is the piece of the puzzle that a lot of these people do not have, unfortunately. So we have to really dig into this, and see the end of all things points back to Rome, just as the Bible says. Never a straight answer is a correct moniker for NASA, because they are full of deceptions. They have such a track record of lying. It is astounding. It is astounding how these people lie through their teeth. And of course, there are all these people who are in the forefront, like the astronauts. They're all secret society members, and they're, inducted into these rituals. And of course, they can be trusted because they've sold out to the devil. There are lots of people who expose NASA all day long, especially in this day and age, 2024. There is no shortage of NASA bloopers and NASA clips and NASA debunked videos. So my goal is my channel is not devoted to flat earth or biblical cosmology or NASA or anything else. However, we will do it justice and look at plenty of their shenanigans so that you can have, in this presentation, enough information, whether this is your first time around or it's not, to know for certain that they are deceivers, and of course that they are playing their part as part of the false prophet. NASA is not the false prophet. NASA is part of the false prophet, which is the United States, because there's many other deceptions that come out of the United States. NASA is just one of them. Hollywood, charismatic movement, all of these things that I've talked about in so many other places are part of the false prophet's agenda to bring this light to the world that will ultimately lead you back to Rome through many roads. If you can't be gotten with the climate change movement, you'll be gotten with the charismatic movement. If you can't get with the charismatic movement, then you'll be with the NAR movement. If the NAR movement doesn't work, they'll get you with something else. There's always something. And this is why the devil has been waging war on many fronts, and we have to be aware of all of those fronts. Otherwise, we will be deceived. So, why is this important? Why is it important at all to look at NASA? Well, the main question, and this is mostly for people who are not aware of heliocentric deception, is that NASA is the main authority on cosmology these days. One of the main, at least, in the United States. And if that main authority and model for other countries to basically follow after with their space organizations, if that main authority has lied to you consistently, no truth coming out of NASA, at best maybe some half-truths that they spin with their model and their math and their CGI, but lying straight through their teeth constantly, and using all of the billions of dollars that they've been given to create this elaborate production to continue to deceive you. If this is the truth, then that is mind-blowing. That is mind-blowing. And what does that say about everything else? That's why this is important. And of course, a lot of people unfortunately believe that NASA is this objective, organization of truth, just like science. Science must be true because they use math. And by now, hopefully you realize that that's not the case. So let's take a look at some things. We have quite a lot to look at today, actually. But I want to first talk about NASA's occult connections. In the spirit of everything we've looked at so far, with all of the occult from Pythagoras all the way to the modern age, through Einstein and everybody else, you saw an unbroken chain of occult transmission. So we should expect to see a lot of occult shenanigans with NASA as well. Now, if you look into their name, they love to use Hebrew. And of course, NASA has a double meaning. Because in Hebrew, you have, if we look this up in the Blue Letter Bible, you have nashah, which means to deceive greatly, to beguile, to seize utterly. So it has a meaning, nashah, to deceive, to beguile. That's not the word that's used when the serpent deceived Eve, but I believe it has the same sense. And if you look at another rendition of it, it's not the same word, it's a different word, but it's pronounced Nasa. Nasa. So you have Nasha and Nasa. Nasa, which is what they like to say, oh, well, this is what it means. It's to lift up, to bear up, to carry, to take. So a lot of NASA apologists will say, well, if anything, it would be this word because it means to lift up, to ascend. So you have from the very beginning a double meaning, which tells you everything, because the occult is all about esoteric, meaning inward, initiated meaning, and exoteric, meaning outward, proclaimed meaning. And if you've read books like Morals and Dogma, Albert Pike, where they say that basically the goal is to deceive the people in the lower ranks as much as possible so they have no clue what they're doing. And the only people that really know is the ones that are super initiated. So this is something you need to realize, that even if you have a family member that worked for NASA or that you know people that work there, it doesn't mean that they're Freemasons or secret society members. It means probably that they're just very deceived, just like everybody else. Until they work their way through the ranks and maybe somebody approaches them to join a secret society or to be part of the Freemasons or whatever other thing, and then they get initiated. But by then, they've sold their soul and they're not going to turn back most of the time. There are some whistleblowers, but they don't go very far. So what's the point? The point is that NASA, the name, has a deliberate double meaning, which of course is very Antichrist. The word Antichrist also has a double meaning. Anti can be in place of or against. And if you've watched my videos on Dark to Light, on all these other things that we've talked about with the coming system, the counterfeit Christian system, is that the spirit of Antichrist is always working this dualistic agenda. On the surface, it seems good and bright and light and love. On the inside, it is completely in rebellion and against Christ. So you have dark and light working constantly against each other. You also have the ping pong of the dialectic between dark and light. The bad cop and the good cop. They both work together to make ultimately the good cop look good. And of course, the good cop in this particular situation is Rome. So this is what's happening with NASA as well. One of the meanings, Nasa, is to ascend, to rise, to go into the heavens. And the other meaning, Nasha, means to deceive. So put it together, do 1 + 1. What do you get? You get an organization who deliberately chose a name that has to deal with rising into the air to deceive mankind. Now, of course, people say, oh, it's actually an acronym for Never a Straight Answer, or National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Yeah, sure. Just like Lucifer, they could have picked any sequence of words. They could have picked any sequence of words, and yet they picked one that to them, to the initiated, creates an acronym that they can basically have their little religion with. So you have to realize this, folks. Now, if we look at some popular memes on the internet, there's some truth there. The NASA logo, if you look at the snake tongue that comes out of it, this is the red little pointed thing. People drew a snake that basically it's a snake tongue. The serpent never speaks the truth. Yeah, there's truth to this. And there's also an Ouroboros here too. If you know what the Ouroboros is, the snake eating its own tail. People, look, you have to understand. That's why I gave you so much history with this presentation. Because if I started with this, people say, oh, you're just reading into it, you're crazy. Well, am I crazy? After the last 2,500 plus years of history that we've covered, and I've shown you a completely uninterrupted lineage of occult transmission. Is it crazy to think that they are doing these symbolic things with their logo? That there's an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, and the tongue of a snake basically surrounding it. Is that crazy? I don't think so. I really don't. I think it's actually quite reasonable. Here's another one. NASA is just Satan minus the T. That's why they say T minus when they blast off. Yeah, why do they say T minus? You ever thought about that? Because when you add the T, it turns into an anagram for Satan, Nasat, Satan. Here's another one that's probably, you've seen it, all of the cultures. We looked at this in previous times when we looked at the ancient cultures. Australian, Chumash, Islamic, Roman, Egyptian, Viking, Persian, they're all the same. They all had some differences, but they're all relatively the same. A flat, enclosed plane. NASA suddenly tells you that you're living on a ball in space, which of course is nonsense. Here's a picture of, what's his name? Scott Hubbard and Eric Schmidt, NASA and Google shaking hands. And of course, if you zoom in on this, you can see their little Freemasonic handshake, and it's out in the open for everybody to see, so that if you accept it, they have permission to deceive you. These things are very common. You know that a lot of the people and the astronauts were Freemasons. Here's a picture comparison. Remember when, what's his name, Bezos launched his, I forget what it's called now, but his version of the rocket, and the Virgin, I think, Virgin something. And supposedly everybody went to space and things like that. Well, if you actually look at, and they're so bad at this. They never really cover their tracks, which is, I don't know if they're doing it intentionally just to troll you, or they're just really sloppy. But if you look at these pictures, it's exactly the same coat, just different lighting, meaning they changed the exposure or something on this to make it slightly bluer for Bezos. But these are Photoshopped. If you can circle, basically, you can see that these are the same folds. William Shatner and Jeff Bezos are wearing the same exact jacket in the same exact position. All that's different is the tint. This is a hue that's a little darker blue. This is lighter blue. Of course, they changed the name too. They wouldn't be that stupid. But look at this. All of these things are the same. These little folds people have circled around. So what does that tell you? That tells you this is fake. Everybody went to space, and if they did, they're not going to let you talk about it. That's for sure. So who knows what all they did? I'm inclined to believe that they go up there to test the firmament, but either way. Here's another picture, famous picture of them, quote unquote, working under the water and getting filmed. And of course, there's a green screen, and all you do is just put a little globe behind it and you're set. And you're on the space station. These are the types of things they do, folks. When you got billions and billions of dollars per year that nobody's basically scrutinizing you for, you are the most expensive Hollywood production on Earth. Here's another meme. Oh, what's it say? How does this get into this? Yeah, how does... By the way, this rinky-dink thing, which supposedly cost, I don't know, $30 million or $50 million in 1970, how does this go into this moon lander? How does that fit into it? You ever wonder these things? The story that they tell you with the moon landing, it's hopefully by now more and more people have woken up. Of course, you have the fairy tale of Nixon calling the moon landers and talking to them, which was just total nonsense. Total theater. That Nixon is on the phone talking to these people. And people bought it up because, again, you're so, at that point in time, you can't blame people. You know, the production people, there was no internet. You can't really fact check things. And they were just enamored by all of these signs and wonders. But these are signs and wonders. These are false signs and wonders. And again, if they're fake and if they're lying to you, and they're going to such lengths to lie to you, what does that tell you? What does that tell you, folks? Here's another interesting meme that says, things that make you go home. It's got a picture of the moon. It's got 6 landing spots for the various Apollo missions. 6 Apollo missions landed on the moon, all on the visible side, adding a total of 12 days. And incredibly, there is not a single minute of Earth footage filmed from there. The only celestial body they saw, our supposed home, and they forgot to film it. They forgot to film it 6 times. 6 times they supposedly went to the moon on the visible side, meaning they should be able to film the Earth, and not once did they ever film the Earth. That's interesting, isn't it? Here's some quotes from some Russian cosmonauts. We haven't been to space. If someone claims that we have been, it's not true. It is not the truth. Igor Volk, Soviet cosmonaut. Miroslav Hermoshwetsky. Earth is flat, as some expect, but I didn't expect this question. I assure you, it is flat. He's a Polish cosmonaut. And of course, there's testimonies of pilots too. Here's, what's his name, Buzz Aldrin with his little 666 hand sign, giving you a picture of what he's doing. This is, I forget this guy's name, but Apollo 11, you can see all of the Freemasonic stuff here. There's his ring on his finger. All these people are Freemasons, folks. We already established this. But these people are all drinking the devil's cup. Look at the Council of 33, Supreme Council, blah, blah, blah. They get their little certificates. their little awards. They're doing shows for their masters, folks. That's why if you're an astronaut like Buzz Aldrin or these people who are, very much in the narrative, you don't get to be in that position unless you've signed a deal with the devil, because you're going to do what you're told and you're going to be initiated. So these people get their little rewards and, and their accolades and their ranks and things like that, but they're doing the devil's work. And this is the Devon Island comparison to, if you haven't heard about this, but Mars is basically just using Devon Island and probably some other places too. I'm sure there's other remote places on Earth that they're using to say, oh, look, we're in Mars. And if you compare Devon Island, which I forget where Devon Island is, I think it's somewhere up north, but anyway, Devon Island and supposedly these Mars pictures, they're basically the same picture, as just the hue is turned off. Again, they're so sloppy. Look at these comparisons. They're the same thing, except the only difference is that autotone is clicked and they suddenly reveal to you the truth. So they just put a tone over it to make it look like it's smoky and dusty and you're on Mars. Here's Pluto. Of course, you probably have seen this image of Pluto, supposedly the planet. And then if you look closely, it's got a hollowed out place for actually Pluto the dog from Disney to go in there. I mean, they're literally trolling you, people. And of course, I've highlighted this before in some of my videos, but it's just such nonsense. Here's another one, a picture of, I don't know how people got this, but there's a giant ISS behind a green screen. And of course, they're filming it and building the production set and everything. This is what they do, folks. The ISS is a farce, and I'll prove it to you today using actually a very funny thing, which is Starlink. Starlink refutes the ISS, and we'll look at a video for that. But this is nonsense. Of course, this is not the only thing they do. They use planes that fly up to very high altitude, and they drop, so that creates a free fall situation. And basically, they film it. So they have a combination of things. These are satelloons. We'll talk about satellites because it's a little more complicated than just balloons. But NASA is the largest consumer of helium. Did you know that? Feel free to fact check that, but they are the largest consumer of helium in the world. So what does that tell you? It tells you they're full of hot air is what it tells you, but it also tells you that they use these balloons for all kinds of things. This is, let me see if we can zoom in. Here's the set, basically, of the moon landing with the green screens. They have their little lander here, some lunar type of place. I mean, just nonsense. And of course, today, these things are getting very exposed. We'll watch a video on this too, but this is the crew of the Challenger that supposedly died. And of course, you look at these people later, they find them later, and they had just a name change, and they put them somewhere else in society. Same people. They're just older now and in different places, and they have basically different jobs. And so they've accomplished their purpose. They're still secret society members. Where's the guy? Here he is. See? Same person. All these people supposedly died, and yet they're actually just given new identities because they've done their job. NASA's 1 billion Jupiter probe just sent back dazzling new photos of the giant planet and its great red spot. This is from Physics and Astronomy Zone. And of course, at the bottom, it says image credit, artist's concept of Jupiter's superstorm. This is artist concept. Of course, this whole thing is an artist concept because it's an illusion. Here's some more Freemason pictures. What is this? Marcos Pontes, I think he's an astronaut, but of course there he is, chummy with all his friends, doing their Freemason thing, getting initiated with a little dagger and a certificate, and 2 thumbs up for NASA. There you go, folks. Here's some badges, I'm guessing. So they're basically, what are they? These are National Reconnaissance Office and NASA mission patches. Notice the Illuminati symbolism. Yeah, just like the Cosmos Club. Remember the Cosmos Club? With the Illuminati eye at the top. Same thing. Nothing new under the sun. Look at these. They're all occult, ascending into the light, and basically deceiving you while they're at it. Nasa and Nasha. That's all you need to know. Here's another picture of a bunch of Freemasons behind, what looks like a lander. This is an old picture. Who knows what this is? I'm sure one of these people was an astronaut. I think this guy was the astronaut. But either way, Freemasons. just hanging out, having fun with their deceptions. Look at our great work that we've done. Here's another meme that says, "Why load a previously burned re-entry module on an airplane?" Here they are reloading the supposed, burnt re-entry module onto this airplane so they can drop it, and then they can say, oh, there's a re-entry that happened from space and it's going through the atmosphere and burning and blah, blah, blah. It's all fake, folks. One big giant show, one big giant production to convince you that this is the truth. That awkward moment when the shadow of your cardboard spaceship stretches all the way to the horizon. Here it is. You can see that. Just nonsense. This is nonsense. Look at this. You think this is going in space? This is like duct tape and tinfoil and cardboard. I mean, it's terrible. Of course, again, we see that now, but at the time people bought into it and they just roll on the momentum. Right now you have the Mars whole thing with Elon, and so this is moon landing 2.0. Here's a picture of this guy working on the giant ball of Jupiter, how a planet is born. Gotta love it. He's just artist rendition. I told you, artist rendition. And they take pictures of these things and they tell you, look at these amazing pictures we have. And of course,
so my question
CGI nonsense. Oh, this guy, this is funny. Let's get our. There we go.
So my question is, how can you operate a lid on the outside of the space station by manipulating something mechanical on the inside of the space station without losing air pressure?
It's called real good engineering.
Hello? Hello? Anybody home? Hey, think would fly.
Yeah, real good engineering. This guy also is, I think, famous for, because they grilled him. I thought this was in the video, but it's not apparently. But they grilled him. I think he's some NASA engineer or somewhere. But they grilled him and said, "How come we never went back to the moon?" And he's like, "Oh, well, we just lost all the technology. We lost all the technology to go back to the moon." Just some awkward answer was just like, you can tell he wasn't prepared to answer it. But obviously, this is also pretty funny too. Let's see what we have here. We have some more videos, some more crazy videos. Oh, this is about, let's see here. Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick and Apollo 11. Yeah, this is a good one. Let's see. Why don't you work? Here we go.
Stanley Kubrick.
This is Stanley Kubrick, and this is NASA and the Apollo logo. Here is Stanley Kubrick, and this is Neil Armstrong, the first man walking on the moon. There's a model of the lunar lander. There's Stanley Kubrick. Here you got NASA, astronauts, and Stanley Kubricks at the top of the set.
Here they are simulating low gravity with wires around their suits.
Here they are building the lunar lander.
And there is Werner von Braun entering the lunar lander.
Again, Stanley Kubrick from the back, and there is the set at the television. The lunar lander again, and the set with the astronaut. Now take a look. There's the footprint of the moon, the first footprint. And Stanley Kubrick is right there, analyzing the work. Here is Neil Armstrong, here is Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick and Apollo 11 logo there.
Stanley Kubrick.
There you go, folks. Like that song. It's made in a Hollywood basement. Here's another one.
The Earth's circumference is 600 times 6 times 6, or 21,600 nautical miles. The Earth's axis, its orbital inclination around the Sun, is 66.6 degrees. The Earth's orbit around the Sun is 66,600 miles per hour. This one's hilarious, y'all. The speed of sound is 666 knots per second. Both the North and South poles are at 66.6 degrees. And let's not forget, astronaut Peggy spent 666 days in space. Good job, Peggy. Good job. The diameter of the moon is 6 times 6 times 60, 2160. The median between Venus's Celsius 464 and Fahrenheit 867, 666. Mars is at 1.666 astronomical miles from the sun. The Earth's circumference is 600 times 6 times 6. Look at that. 21,600 nautical miles. But what's the distance to the moon? 6 times 60 times 666. Oh yeah, 239,700. The diameter of the moon is 6 times 6 times 60. What about Ceres, a dwarf planet?
He keeps going. So you can tell this is all just nonsense, folks. People accept these numbers. They don't actually do the math. They realize that these are actually, people are doing occult numerology with all of these distances and sizes and bogus numbers. They're doing their occult numerology religion. There's no such thing. Everything is 666, whether it's a multiple or a divisor or whatever else. Have you ever thought about that? That you're moving at 666,000 miles per hour through the galaxy through the space. The galaxy is moving at 666,000 miles per hour. The solar system, you're moving in 66,600 miles per hour. And the Earth's diameter is 6 times 60 times 600. And all of this nonsense. Where do they get this from? Has anybody actually measured it? No, of course not. Because the Earth isn't these sizes or these distances, but these are occult things for it. Because again, for them, it's a religion. For them, numbers are meaningful. And so they put numbers everywhere to basically give them power in their minds, spiritual power, which of course is not the case. Here's another one. Is this, let's see. Oh yeah, this is now some Photoshop nonsense. So what do we take from this? Up to here, basically what? Well, we know that NASA is full of occult nonsense. Even their missions, like all the Apollo missions, Artemis, Atlas, Calypso, Janus, Saturn, it's all named after pagan deities and pagan gods, honoring their mystery religion. And of course, the more you know, the more you realize that this is just consistent with everything else we've looked at. These occult connections that we're just scratching the surface are more than just a coincidence, folks. You have to be honest. And again, realize that everything you've been told is a lie. These people are Freemasons, mystics, occultists, alchemists, paying homage to their mystery religion. Rocket launches are like concerts. Of course, you should know about concerts now, how they do all sorts of mind control and programming, like at the Super Bowl, all sorts of occult nonsense, because the attention is there. For them, again, they're synergists. So they believe that if they get enough attention on something, they can make it happen. So they use these concerts and these big events as ways to actualize attention on their magical spell and put people's consciousness behind this reality, because again, they believe they can create their reality. So they do these rituals to get attention and ooh, ah, and basically take that marveling. And in their mind, you have to think like an occultist. Of course, it's nonsense. We know that God is sovereign and whatever he has predetermined will happen. And he allows them to be deceived, and he allows some of these things to happen so that they could be deceived and destroyed. But God is sovereign. And in that universe, there's no wiggle room for you create your reality with God. God is the one who creates reality for his glory, and you are experiencing it. And of course, if you're wicked, you aren't aware of that because you're deceived and you're still experiencing reality to some degree and you're going to get destroyed. But nevertheless, these people are very deceived. And because they're synergists, they do these ceremonies, these religious ceremonies, like the Paris Olympics, like concerts, like the Super Bowl, like rocket launches, with the intent to basically harness people's energy and use them for basically an occult effect. Kind of like the 2024 eclipse, where everybody was hyped up and they had to do a little rocket launch right during the eclipse. Who knows what they were doing? But for them, at the very minimum, it was a religious ceremony. So none of this should be a surprise. This is just scratching the surface. There's so much of this stuff. There's so much occult nonsense with NASA. At this point, I think it's just so easy to find because of the internet and because of all the people that have exposed it. And of course, again, you have tons of bloopers and people exposing this all day long. That's not my goal. My goal is to give you just enough to confirm everything we've looked at, because there's nothing new under the sun. You have to come to terms with the reality that everything you've been told is a lie. The Bible is the truth, but outside the Bible, it's a real gamble. Don't feel stupid. Don't feel bad. Don't feel ashamed. We've all been deceived. I loved space. I loved rushing home and watching Star Trek or Deep Space Nine. I loved sci-fi movies, sci-fi video games. I was all about sci-fi. So don't feel bad. Don't feel ashamed. Don't feel stupid. The most scientific thing you can do is question what you've been told. And if you are presented with reasonable amount of evidence to change your belief, that's the key. Now, let's look at some false signs and wonders, since NASA is part of the false prophet. Hopefully you've seen them a little bit already, but let's take a look. This is from some reel on Facebook, but it's Welcome to NASA's Photoshop Masterclass. Let's see. And
images from the James Webb Space Telescope have been nothing short of spectacular. Every image tells a unique story about some corner of the universe. But there's another story as to how the images are actually created that I really can only just begin to scratch the surface of. It turns out there's an entire team of astronomers whose sole job is to bring those Webb public release images to life, and that team consists of two people. Joe De Pasquale and Elisa Pagan are the two imaging visualization specialists at the Space Telescope Science Institute, and they were gracious enough to give us a master class in how they process different images.
Let's see.
I've opened the FITS file, one of the filters, into FITS Liberator, and this is what you see straight from the telescope.
Pay attention. This is what you see. Let's take a look at it. Couple little flicks and just black. Is that consistent with the dog cam at 100,000 feet in the air, where you basically saw just black? You didn't see the stars, which is an interesting point. By the way, this is what you see, folks. So now let's see how they're going to make it into those beautiful Hubble space pictures that everybody's just so enamored with. Let's see.
So as you can see, it doesn't have spectacular color, and you can't even see a lot of detail. And that's because the dynamic range of these telescopes are so large. They're so sensitive. So there's lots of brightness values. And we have to do something called stretching in order to reveal these details near the dark end of this histogram here. So right now it's in a linear scale. So just as it came out of the telescope, but we can apply different functions to stretch the data in such a way that we're revealing more data, but we're not removing or clipping any data. So we can contain the black points and the white points. So as you can see here, we can start manipulating this and bring out more detail. This is really just for my knowledge so that I know which one I'm prescribing so I don't get all messed up. So that's the beauty of Photoshop. Okay, so here we're going to combine all of the filters together, and this will be our first full color image here. And so I'm kind of doing it layer by layer.
How do you know what you're looking at? That's my question to you. How do you know what you're looking at when the raw image and the final product are completely two different things? And maybe there's some data in there that's being brought out, but after all of these modifications, how do you know what you're looking at? Are you looking at the firmament? Are you looking at a nebula a billion trillion miles away? What are you looking at?
And then we will get somewhere. Okay, so this is our initial full color image, and it's really beautiful on its own, but there's still things that we want to manipulate. So for me, this is where it becomes a little bit more subjective, even though we are following some like scientific principles and artistic.
We're already neck deep in subjectivity now.
Principles in the sense that we do want to white balance the image and color correct it just like a photographer would. But to me, this doesn't seem very natural. Like having sort of these like really red dust and then this kind of teal gas. It doesn't seem like something I would see in real life, I guess. And that's where I start to shift the colors a little bit to sort of mimic more natural life. So I feel like these orangey, rusty colors and this more blue color sort of translates better. And so I'm just kind of...
How do you know what's natural when you're looking at something supernatural? That's the big question of the day, isn't it, folks?
Shifting the colors up the or down the spectrum, but I'm keeping and maintaining the chromatic order, and the relationships maintain the same. And it's really just a matter of bringing everything together, and it's more of a personal choice at this point, since we've sort of addressed all the science behind it. And so this is sort of the end stage where I kind of toned things down even a little bit more because it felt a little too yellow, a little too dramatic, and I wanted to feel more spacey, more ethereal, but also still have that and maintain that contrast between the two distinct regions. And yeah, that's how you process an image.
That's amazing.
That's amazing. Isn't that amazing? How from the very beginning when it was completely black to now suddenly have all of these colors floating around in the the nebula that's supposedly there is just nonsense, folks. This is just false science and wonders. And people think this is like objective science. And they, and they goo-goo gaga over it. And if you tell them the Hubble Space Telescope is not what they think it is, and it's just all a sham, they look at you and say, oh, you're an idiot. How could you possibly believe that? Really? Just look at their own testimony of what they're doing. It's just fakery. Let's see. What's next on the list? Oh, this is our big ball. This guy is pretty famous. Hopefully you've learned about him. You can see how they do it on the Earth, supposedly the big blue marble, right? You'll see an apology article for this in just a second. See, look at this. It's the same, just copy and paste. They took some pictures of the Earth from high altitude, composite, bend it, copy and paste some clouds. This is a zombie. This is fake. It's fake. Now, this guy in the beginning, this guy right here, he's famous for saying, well, it is Photoshop because it has to be. Of course, if you haven't heard about him, there's an article here that basically explained it's Photoshop because it has to be. Now they're explaining it. Much has been made of Robert Simmons' statement about the blue marble image above, and that, quote, it's Photoshop because it has to be. I think the misunderstanding of the statement started out as trolling, but has evolved so that now some people are convinced that it means all images of Earth are fake. No. They're not fake. They're real, folks. Let's not go into conspiracy theories here. Simmons is referring to the blue marble image from 2002, which actually isn't the image you see above exactly. It's this, i.e. a Mercator map plus some cloud information, and then they curved it. It's an image of the entire planet's surface with no clouds and daylight, and also an image of the entire planet's surface with just clouds. Combining the two together allows you to render images like the one famously used on the iPhone lock screen, and also to render 3D animations from arbitrary positions, blah, blah, blah. This is all fake, folks. It's not the Earth. This is fakery. And of course, they copy and paste and make it like, oh, it's got to look like space. Remember that woman? She's like, oh, it's got to look ethereal. What do you mean it's got to look ethereal? That's completely subjective. How do you know what it looks like when you're basing it off of what you expect it to look like based on what you've been told space is? She's probably either a secret society member, or she's just one of these people that is deceived on the lower ends, that doesn't know, and so she's just doing her job in her little cubicle and not questioning. And either way, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they're participating in deception. And these people, like this guy knows. Look at him. Look at his face. He just knows. He knows what he's up to, but he doesn't want to admit it. This is from, yeah, this is the Challenger video. All right.
In a previous NASA speech, I was shut down by NASA. So I felt, what's my recourse? Let's go to the county that this happened in. So I went in and brought this poster, and I focused on 3 astronauts. And these are the 3 that have exact doppelgangers with the exact same names. And I think that's the real kicker here, because we can all find someone that looks like us. I can find someone that looks like me somewhere. Yeah. But he's got a distinct cheek line on each side. One of his eyes is actually more open than the other. His hair kind of waviness. it's very similar. And to have him with the same name, like I'll never run into somebody with my exact same name that looks
like
spitting
you.
images
No,
to me.
the odds. I don't think the odds are.
So I looked it up and I tried and I tried. I found one case from like 1900 something where a prisoner, found a guy with the same name, same exact face, and they introduced fingerprinting. I mean, it was a big deal. So to think that this happened and no one ever covered it, no one ever's like, I look like that supposed dead astronaut, like nothing. It's just complete silence. And Dick Scobie made a website with a rocket blasting off with a cow strapped to it. So you mean to tell me the guy that looks just like you with the same age, same name, same facial features, also opened a company and his company website has a rocket strapped to a cow, leaving a smoke trail with a spiral just like the Challenger?
So let me ask you a question, Justin. So
By the way, notice that the spiral is in a 6 shape, and you also know what spiral means for the Secret Society members. If you don't know, then I'm not going to mention it. But
okay, they come up with this elaborate thing. They lie to everybody. What's the purpose of lying to everybody and faking these people's deaths? What's the goal from all that?
Great question. And before, just a quick disclaimer, I also don't claim to know how exactly or why exactly or even who exactly did it. But when you walk into a crime scene and there's a homicide, there's people dead there, the evidence is clear, right? You can't walk in and say, well, I don't understand how or why they did this. This is a conspiracy theory, right? I'm not saying you're doing that. But just to be clear, we don't know, and it will be pure speculation. But with that said, I'll speculate that I believe they may have done it to make space travel seem dangerous and impossible, because I don't think they can get very high. I think that's why we didn't go to the moon. I think that's why a lot of the pictures from outer space of Earth are faked and created in Photoshop. They can't get very high. And I don't know if they told these guys a week ahead of time, a year ahead of time, the day before, but somewhere along the line, they either forced them to lie. If you see Neil, Buzz, and Michael get back from the moon landing, they look like they just got a life sentence. They look like men forced to lie, in my opinion. Maybe these people knew a lot longer. But I think in 1986, they never imagined the internet coming about, because they let 3 of them keep their exact same names. But to go to the ISS real quick, I do believe we're being lied to incredibly, by a lot, with the ISS. You've got a situation.
We'll talk about the ISS for sure. And again, you'll watch proof that the ISS is not real.
Where we've got bubbles that have been viewed when they're doing spacewalks. They train in underwater pools. How come we're seeing the bubbles during the real thing?
Oh, wow.
You're showing us training videos and doctoring it. But we found too much evidence of them faking the footage of them inside and outside the ISS. Sometimes they're inside and they'll grab objects that aren't really there. It's like virtual reality. They're using special effects.
And I saw one that you had where the guys to it.
In a previous NASA speech, I was shut down by NASA.
Yeah, so there's so many of these types of videos. These people are fakers. They're professional deceivers, folks. Nasha and Nasa, rising into the air and deceiving you while they're doing it. This is the point. And he mentioned Photoshop too. And of course, there's so much of this that, again, you can look at into yourself. They are professional Photoshoppers. But as usual, they refute themselves because they say, for example, like that the Earth has a bulge. Oh, now the Earth has a bulge at the equator. It's more, pear-shaped or oblong-shaped or whatever other shape they say it has. And yet you have pictures like the Big Blue Marble, like the one we just looked at, or Earthrise. Remember the famous picture, which we will see them refuting themselves yet again. Because when you lie so much, it is impossible to cover your tracks, especially when you have something like the internet. It is impossible to cover all of your tracks. And this is what happens. The only thing they can do, let me put it this way, is they can just keep creating more lies and propaganda to be louder and louder than the truth coming up. But of course, the truth is going to surface eventually one way or another. Nevertheless, this is what they do. But for example, the Earthrise picture, where they took from the moon and they saw a picture or whatever, and it's a famous picture in the 1970 that was the basis for the environmentalist movement, all that stuff, right, that we looked at, which of course makes no sense because the Earth would be huge if you're standing on the moon, if such a thing existed. But either way, there's that picture, there's the blue marble, all of them are complete spheres. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is if you're saying that the Earth has a bulge now because you need to change your math, then all of the pictures that or before of showing the Earth as a perfect circle are fake. So people who say, oh, we have pictures of Earth from space. No, you don't. You don't have any pictures of Earth from space. We have footage from Earth from 100,000 feet above the Earth, which is completely flat, infinite plane. Flat as a board. That's not possible if you're living on a ball. So they refute themselves, but of course they're very clever with CGI. This guy mentioned that they're on the ISS. And today, look, when you have billions of dollars, you can do a lot of signs and wonders. And we looked at some of them, some of the goof things on the ISS, like I believe in the first video, I showed you a clip of this guy doing a magic trick in space. And he's like, look, it's floating, and it's like floating somehow on some sort of, probably in free fall that they're doing this trick. And then at some point, something happens, something changes, and he lets go of the cards and they fall directly down, which is just like, okay, obviously there's no such thing as, zero gravity or whatever you're trying to pull off. Something has changed with your setup and you weren't aware of it. And so these types of things are so common. But nowadays they have CGI, they have, virtual objects, they reach for it, and the person behind the screen plugs it into their hand right away. And it looks like they're doing stuff, which of course there are glitches too. And those glitches expose their lies, and people have documented it quite a bit. So you have to remember you are in Plato's cave, right? If you've ever read that famous story, being a prisoner shackled to the wall, looking at shadows being cast by the people, by your handlers behind you that are casting all these shadows. And you have to wake up because everything is an illusion. Here's another one from, this is an interesting video about this scientist in 1965 who was interviewed, who basically said they're not going to the moon. This is impossible because the moon is plasma, which again, just like every other voice of reason and science and history, what's going to happen? Did you ever hear about this? Probably not. Probably if you've researched, quote unquote, flat earth and anything else, you've probably seen this interview. But most people haven't heard about this guy or his theories or his ideas because it gets buried. But let's see.
Now, one thing, you have a theory about the moon, and we expect to be able to get observable facts about the moon fairly soon. What is your theory?
Well, it is by now rather more than a theory. 10 or 11 years ago, I stated to various scientists that the moon is not a piece of rock, but it is a plasma phenomena, cosmic plasma, and that this fact will eventually be confirmed. I made certain predictions which were already confirmed in 1958, and the situation now is coming close to a complete confirmation.
What will be the result if you're proved to be correct in your theories?
The result will be profound and decisive, because it will give proof that a complete reinvestigation of the laws of nature is necessary. Because if the moon is a plasma, no man will ever land on it. The soft landing attempts will all fail. That means that the mass of the moon is far less than is currently assumed. It's in a different state of energy, and it has far less mass. That means there is no more explanation for the tides. If the moon, for example, had only a thousandth part of its current mass, then the tides would only be 2 inches high under conventional theories instead of sometimes 14 feet. And that means that if it is proved that the moon is a plasma, then all gravitational theories are out, and a new concept of the cosmos and of its laws has to be evolved.
God forbid we can't have that.
You're being a bit adventurous, though, because you know that we're going to be able to test out your theories on the moon fairly soon.
Well, not anymore. 11 years ago, of course, it was rather taking a risk. I was considered a lunatic, of course. But by now, the evidence, accumulated evidence, is already so much in my favor that I'm not taking any
Are you familiar with that evidence, I wonder? I'm not. Nobody's heard about it.
risks anymore. On the contrary, there is scientific views expressed all over the world now that the moon seems to be of a quite different nature of what was assumed.
But the Americans and Russians are thinking of...
Did you catch that? It said scientific views all over the world that the moon isn't what we've been told. This was before they did the moon hoax.
Landing men on it.
Well, that will never happen. Not on the moon. On Mars, on Venus, on other planets, yes. But the moon is definitely, as I assert, a plasma.
Now, this guy, you can tell he still believes in heliocentrism because he believes you can land on other planets and so on. But he's telling you that the moon is not what they say it is. It's a plasma phenomenon, energy phenomenon, which could be true to some extent. Certainly, there's a lot of interesting things like, for example, lunar waves. If you've ever seen this before, get ready, get your seatbelt, get some popcorn, because this is quite a trip here.
Okay, I want to say thank you to the Jungle Surfer for the narration request and getting
I'm going to just go a little bit slower than chipmunk speed.
this out to his viewers. My hope is that a lot of people get to see this. It's the real deal.
This is Crow 777. He's got some interesting stuff. Don't 100% agree with everything, but he documents these lunar waves, which you can see going through the moon. Again, the moon is a two-dimensional projection, some kind of two-dimensional thing. It's a plasma phenomenon. Who knows what it is exactly? But the thing that really sells that for me is this phenomena called the lunar wave. It looks like when you have these TVs and there's an electromagnetic wave going through them, you can see the same thing happening with the moon. It's pretty wild.
Give me a second. Let me get the clip started here. So I'm filming one night looking for objects. I pan my camera down and the wave starts, this hologram wave. I don't notice it. And then it catches up to the camera and I do notice it. I glance at the moon, but when you're staring at things, you don't know whether it's your eyes or what. And then I notice a second wave coming. And at this point, I'm thinking it's my camera. I look up at the moon again and, I just don't know what to think. I save the clip out. I don't delete it. I almost did. And I look at it for quite some time, weeks maybe. Looking at it over and over, and I'm realizing that, this is not the way a digital camera malfunctions. This is an organic.
Do you see this? I mean, it's kind of maybe hard to tell. The moon is basically getting refreshed or something. Something is happening. Just watch it carefully.
No pixelation, no shredding of the signal. And it finally dawns on me that the pan of the camera proves it. When I pan down, and I usually don't shoot this way, I usually stay centered, almost always stay centered, trying to increase my odds of catching something unusual. But when I pan down, the wave starts, and I pan in front of the wave, which catches up to the camera. And that is the proof in the pudding.
See that?
You'll notice a couple things. The wave looks like it bulges in the center as if it's going down. If you stop the frame and measure it, you'll see that the sides are lower than the center. So there's kind of a bulge, and it's also tilted a little bit, and it mirrors the tilt of the poles of the moon. I haven't measured it exactly, but visually you can tell. I would urge people to go look at Jive Bop and Gridkeeper. Gridkeeper catches structures, and Jive Bop has done some incredible work with incredible setup, and he claims you can see through the floor of the mare or the mare, the seas on the moon, and you can see structure and stuff under there. By the way, if I don't comment back, I apologize. I'm not going to use Google+. I'm boycotting it. I have another video on this. I have a degree in internet technology, and I tell you a few reasons why it's bad.
Watch the sides.
Anyhow, moving on. After I posted this video and one other called Mars is No Longer Red, where I assert ISON may have electrically interacted with the planet, my UK traffic jumped, as did my New Zealand traffic, at which point I'm contacted by a red where I assert ISON may have electrically interacted with the planet.
Watch here. Watch this go up.
UK traffic jumped,
See it?
As did my New Zealand traffic, at which point I'm contacted by I have another video on this. I have a degree in internet technology, and I tell you a few reasons why it's bad. Anyhow, moving on. After I posted this video and one other called Mars is No Longer Red, where I assert ISON may have electrically interacted with the...
Okay, watch. Now you can see because there's a curve here. It's a little bitter. You see that? See that little depression? Watch this go up through here. Watch it.
Planet. My UK traffic jumped, as did my New Zealand...
It's very obvious at the top. Just go just a little bit.
Interacted with the planet.
You can, if you watch this on probably your phone, maybe you'll have a little better view because this is a little bit smaller, but either way.
My UK traffic.
Look at the top now. Look at this top because at the top is very visible as it refreshes through.
Traffic jumped, as did my New Zealand traffic, at which point I'm contacted by a astrophotographer for the country, I guess, the director for the country's astrophotography of comets and asteroids. And he tells me all the things I'm doing wrong and why I'm not scientific, and I am an amateur, but he won't provide me the images of Mars I'm asking for. And I noticed this clip also gets a ton of traffic from the UK, and none of my other stuff did before this.
Look at the way it starts. That is really impressive. This is 75% slow.
I am an amateur, but he won't provide me the images of Mars I'm asking for. And I noticed this clip also gets a ton of traffic from the UK, and none of my other stuff did before this.
See that?
I guess it's not proof positive, but to me it's a note of interest. Now, a lot of people out there are saying the moon's not there, that it's just a projected hologram. I observe the moon straight for a year every month to catch all these objects that are shot and posted on my YouTube channel. I can tell you I believe the moon is there, and I believe that they cover it with a hologram so that we can't see what's going on the face of the moon because we have good enough equipment to see these things now. So what I did is I bought a cheap light spectrum tool and a prism. And I observed daylight, I observed false light, man-made light, light bulbs and things like that, and then I shot through my telescope and just off a full moon, the spectrum of the moon with a prism and the light spectrum tool. And it's not 100% scientific, but I can tell you that it's damn close to sunlight. So if the light I collected is off a hologram, it's a damn good one. Again, my guess is that when the moon's in like quarter phases or slivers or other things, you're actually looking at the moon. I think when it starts to get full or well lit on the face, they cover it with a hologram so that we can't see what they're doing under there. It's not what you think it is. I can tell you that. I've observed other people's video work, and my own intuition, having stared at the moon for a year, I can tell you it's not just a rock in space. There's a lot going on up there, and I hope that a lot of people can see this clip, because this is the real deal, as are all the clips that I have on my YouTube channel. There is no manipulation. If something's color corrected, I make it obvious, but there's no animation going on. These are all 100% real observation clips. Anyhow, I want to thank again the Jungle Surfer for sharing.
Yeah, so you can look into this yourself. Some of these, they were originally, I was going to look it up on Internet Archive. There was a whole library of them that he's collected. But as you know, as of the time of this video, Internet Archive got hacked, and who knows if they're taking it down or whatever. But ultimately, you can look into this on BitChute. BitChute is a great place. I don't think he has them on YouTube. He does have a channel on YouTube, but on YouTube, I don't think he has these lunar wave videos. So very, very fascinating thing. I don't agree that they're projecting a hologram over the moon, because the moon has been around forever, as far as we can tell, and it's looked the same. In 1965, the scientists said it was a plasma phenomenon. So people before us 50 years ago had other ideas about the moon as well as some sort of energetic phenomenon. It's very likely some sort of two-dimensional thing, given the fact that it's refreshing and that you always see the same side, which is very strange. We'll look at also the moon map of the Earth. If you haven't heard about that, the moon is probably some sort of photograph when creation was made in the very beginning. Now, if that sounds like a crazy rabbit hole, it is a crazy rabbit hole. We're going to unpack it more in the next episode when we talk about 15 problems with the circular flat Earth model, because it's more relevant to that particular topic. But if you haven't heard about it, the moon being a map of the Earth, then buckle your seatbelt. But if you know about that, then it's like, all right, this is obviously like a photograph. It's some sort of negative maybe. But either way, the fact that there's lunar waves through this thing, to me, confirms that what we're looking at is not a three-dimensional object, but some sort of two-dimensional, who knows what it is. Again, I don't know what it is, but it's fascinating. And even the phases of the moon, they don't work in the way that we would expect a three-dimensional. You'll see later, I'll show you a video from an artist who deals with sculptures and sketching and all these things. And it's very interesting that somebody from his background would do a video on something in cosmology, but it's a very valuable video because he talks about how shadows coming over a spherical body do not create the effect that we see in moon phases. Meaning you're not seeing the shadow of the Earth covering the moon when you're seeing these various moon phases. You're seeing, like, imagine a picture being occluded by a filter, like a polarized filter or something like that. Something is happening that's very different. It's not a three-dimensional object, and there's experimental proof of that as well. So who knows what it is? Who knows what the moon is? But either way, it's certainly not what they're telling you. And what that means is nobody landed on the moon. This is, this is another video on this topic, which is a demonstration. This is like Moon Phases Demonstration, National Science Teaching Association or something. And I want to show you something with this because it's just so bogus. They're like, look, this is how it works. Let's see. Let's get you right about here.
Ball is going to represent the moon, and your head is going to represent the Earth. So let me show you how this works. We know that the moon orbits the Earth. So in this model, I'm going to get the moon, the foam ball, to orbit the Earth, my head.
Now watch this carefully.
Notice that no matter where the moon is in its orbit,
Stop right there. This is what you should notice if you haven't noticed it already. If you have an object that is spherical, light hits that object and creates a tangent and creates a little point. You see this point of light? You don't see that on the moon, folks. The moon is and look at the shadow all around, by the way, the spherical object, because it's a sphere. And so light concentrates on a particular tangent point. The moon does not have this effect. The moon is luminous. It's a light source. It's giving off its own light, and it's two-dimensional. It's like a screen or a picture that is lit up. It's not a sphere. This is nonsense. Because again, look what happens to light when light hits a sphere. It creates a tangent point.
Half of it is always lit up by the sun.
Look right here. Look how drastic that is. You see that point in the middle based on the light? Yeah, that's what happens to spheres. The moon is not a sphere, and it's certainly not reflecting light. It's giving off its own light. Here you can see it really bad. Look at that. That doesn't happen with the moon. That has never happened once with the moon, because the moon is not a sphere getting light from the sun and bouncing it off. That is the opposite of what the Bible tells you. The Bible tells you the moon is its own light, just like the sun. Two great lights in the sky, the greater light and the lesser light. This is the lesser light. Well, the lesser light is not bouncing off light from the sun. That's nonsense. Certainly not from, kajillions of miles away.
But when the moon is in this position, I can't see any of the lighted side of the moon from Earth.
See this too? Look at this. See where the light hits? And it's like a refraction of a sort of point, a tangent point.
My head. From this angle, you can see what I am seeing from Earth. We call this new moon. When it's new moon, we look up at the sky and we can't see the moon. It's there, but the side that's reflecting sunlight is away from us.
See, again, they explain to you these things. It seems like they explain it to you based on the heliocentric model, but this is not true. You'll see very, very shortly that shadows being cast over the moon as a sphere does not work the way that they're telling you.
Now, as I slowly make the moon orbit to my left, I can begin to see a tiny sliver of that lighted side. We call that a crescent moon. As the moon keeps orbiting, we can see more and more of that lighted side. We see half.
Wait there. Look at this. You don't see this. You don't see this tangent point on a moon. Not at all. This is nonsense. So it seems like they're explaining it to you, but it's just fakery as usual. It's misdirection. These are parlor tricks, folks. These are parlor tricks. You live in a supernatural world that is beyond explanation. We can marvel at it. We can certainly have ideas, but we can't explain all these things because the Creator is beyond explanation. And so NASA tries to explain it to you with these cute little parlor tricks so that you end up obeying and listening to NASA and science as the authority, which has placed itself between you and Christ. So let's look at some more videos. This is a bloopers video from David Weiss, if you know who he is. Again, I don't agree 100% with all these people, but they're useful. Refresh. Or no, let's play.
Mr. Armstrong, Bart Sibrel, ABC Digital. Wanted to give you the opportunity to swear on the Bible.
Oh, this is not David Weiss. This is this guy getting grilled. He's asking him to swear on the Bible that he went to the moon or not, and he won't do it.
Walked on the moon. Will you put your left hand on the Bible and swear to God that you walked on the moon?
Gentlemen. Mr. Sibrel.
Yes? If you really walked on the moon, why would you not do that? So why don't you just put the into the record in the argument and put your hand on the Bible, swear to God you walked on the moon.
Mr. Sibrel, knowing you, that's probably a fake Bible.
Really? Well, no, it's a real Bible. You have the opportunity to have $5,000.
The meeting is not open.
Well, you have $5,000 cash. You can give it to charity if you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon.
Please,
I have the tape.
It'd be fine.
Why don't you swear to? Why not? Why won't you do it? So why don't you put your hand on the Bible and swear to God that you walked on the moon?
Mr. Sibrel has made a fool of himself in front of the world. Mr. Sibrel, you do not deserve answers.
Why has nobody...
You don't deserve answers, and it's a fake Bible, and he's made a fool of himself. He won't swear and do it. He just won't do it.
Been to the moon in such a long time?
That's not an 8-year-old's question. That's my.
Remember, Buzz was the one with the little 666 hand sign we saw earlier.
What I want to know, but I think I know it because we didn't go there, and
the little girl asked him, "Why haven't we been to the moon in such a long time?"
And that's the way it happened. And if it didn't happen, it's nice to know why it didn't happen. So in the future, if we want to keep doing something, we need to know why something stopped in the past that we want to keep it going. money is a good thing.
That was a Kamala Harris answer if I heard one. But there you go. This is all just fakery, folks. This one is from David Weiss now, yeah. Exposing more of their bloopers.
Saturn, famous picture of Saturn. We took it off their website, put it in Photoshop, cranked up the levels, and it is just slapped together, crappy, amateur cut and paste job. Okay, here's Mars. Look at the shadow over here. Where's the shadow over here? That's weird, right? Here's the moon from NASA.gov. The sun's over here. Look at the shadows below these solar panels. How's that work? Right? Again, and then this one, if we look carefully, we were zooming in on a shot. We discovered life on Mars. Look, right here, a fly. There's a fly, life on Mars. We've proven it. Or life on Devon Island and wherever that is. All right. Saturn, famous picture.
So there you go, folks. Life on Mars. It's a little, what kind of fly that was. This is about the Saturn rockets. I mean, oh gosh, this is a video of a bird getting knocked out by the rocket launch. Now, why this is important, let's see if I can play it. It's kind of hard to see. Let's see. You see, here's the bird, and the circle's around it, but you can see it just basically, it just knocks out. It's knocked out because of the decibels. The amount of sound that this thing supposedly makes is up to, I believe, 220 decibels, which is insane. 203 decibels is 10,000 jet engines worth of sound, which is, the bird got knocked out and it got liquefied, basically, by the amount of sound force that was coming from these supposed engines. So why is that important? Well, you have, for example, this Quora thread where it says, how did astronauts survive the 220 decibels that Saturn V rocket made at launch when the maximum decibels that a human ear can tolerate is 85 and 185 to 200 will kill you? Yeah. How did the astronauts survive these high, and remember, decibels are on a logarithmic scale. They're exponentially higher. So 220 is way more significant than 200. And 200 will kill you. If you were exposed to 200 decibels, you would die. Just like that bird. So 220 is enormous. It's unfathomable, unfathomably loud and dangerous. So, of course, they give you these explanations that, let's see what this person says. First of all, Earth, the maximum decibel level sound pressure is 194 or whatever. Why is 194 the loudest possible? An important fact about the loudest sound category is the comparison of the Earth's blah, blah, blah. They give you this video here. The shockwave, let's see. It's one of these is explaining, yes, the astronauts had been standing beside, if the astronauts had been standing beside the 5F1 1.5 million pound thrust rocket engines of the first stage at launch, the 220 decibels probably would have killed them, but maybe not before the other things such as the blast of hot combustion gases pouring out of the engine bells. The sound vibration was so strong that NASA engineers designed the pad to spray huge volumes of water at the pad and engine exhaust to prevent the sound from damaging the launch pad. This would have mitigated the sound level a bit, but direct exposure would still have been lethal. Fortunately, the Apollo astronauts were over 350 feet above the engine bells, with 5.6 million pounds of propellant. This is another joke with the idea that you have so much weight that you're trying to push up in the air. It's just nonsense. But between them and the noise, they were in an airtight capsule in spacesuits with earphones on in order to communicate with launch control. Although it was probably quite loud within the capsule during launch, it was certainly not dangerously loud, right? 220 decibels is unimaginable. And to be basically on that ship, and somehow you're telling me that they were safe from that sound, from that vibration, it doesn't make any sense. These rockets very likely don't have people in them. They're designed for show and for stage and for also probably doing research on the firmament. Wernher von Braun, who was neck deep in all these deceptions, on his tombstone, he has Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament above shows his handiwork. I.e., yeah, God still wins. We tried, but we still couldn't get through it. That's what that tells me, the tombstone. Even if they got to space, quote unquote, if there was such a thing as space, You have to realize, folks, that rockets cannot function in space. The idea that you can propel a thruster through a void or a vacuum doesn't work through physics. It doesn't, because of the free expansion of gases. What happens is the gas is not pulled or sucked into the vacuum, nor is it pushed out of a high pressure container. When you have a high pressure container, like a fuselage, and you're pushing, basically a thrust out of it, there's no, because it's a vacuum, there's no work being done. There's no work being done, meaning you can't push yourself in a vacuum with thrusters. That whole idea is nonsense. Like from sci-fi movies, that's just nonsense in a vacuum of space. This is on Wikipedia. This is the Joule-Thomson effect. In thermodynamics, the Joule-Thomson effect, also known as the Joule-Kelvin effect, describes the temperature change of a real gas or liquid when it is expanding, typically caused by the pressure loss from the flow through a valve or porous plug, while keeping it insulated so that no heat is exchanged with the environment. This process is called the throttling process or Joule-Thomson process. No work is done. History. The effect is named after James Prescott Joule and William Thomson, first Baron Kelvin, who discovered it in 1852. That means from the 1850s we knew that rocket travel in space is nonsense. It followed upon earlier work by Joule on Joule expansion, in which a gas undergoes free expansion in a vacuum and the temperature is unchanged if the gas is ideal. So there's no work being done through these things. This is from the pubs.acs.org, The Expansion of Gas into a Vacuum and the Kinetic Theory of Gases, published 1902, October 1st, by Peter Fireman. I'll just read the first page here. It is a fundamental fact that when a gas expands into a vacuum, there is, roughly speaking, no evolution or absorption of heat in the whole body of gas. But while the passing of a gas into an empty vessel is not accompanied by any change in the total quantity of heat in the gas, a change in the distribution of the heat takes place. If the experiment is carried out with the aid of two metallic vessels of equal capacity, communicating by means of a tube provided with a stopcock, and if one vessel is filled with a gas under considerable pressure while the other is vacuous, then on opening the stopcock and allowing the gas to pass into the empty vessel until equilibrium is established, we observe a considerable rise of temperature in the vessel, which was vacuous, and nearly equal fall in the other. What is the cause of this simultaneous rise and fall of the temperature? A rise and fall which seems to compensate one another? An attempt to give a clear answer to this question is the object of the present paper. Let us dwell for a little while in the important theoretical bearings of the experiment described. In the first place, it at once leads to the thermodynamical principle that the energy of gas is independent of its volume. In the second place, the fact that there is no change in the total energy when a gas expands into a vacuum clearly shows that there is no repulsive force between its molecules. For if there were a repulsive force, the expansion would involve a decrease of potential energy, which decrease would have to be made good by the increase of kinetic energy, by an absolute increase of the temperature of the entire mass of the gas. Since this is not the case, it follows there, blah, blah, blah. So, again, as you saw with Schrodinger, as you saw with everybody else, good science tells you, oh, this is what it is, and then they take it and spin it and lie and appropriate it to their own model. We've known for a while that the idea of a rocket flying around through a vacuum is impossible. Of course, you also have the Van Allen radiation belt, if you know about that, of whatever that is. I think it's the firmament. But in the heliocentric model, it is a zone of energetic charged particles, most of which originate from the solar wind, that are captured by and held around a planet by the planet's magnetosphere. Earth has two such belts, and sometimes others may be temporarily created. The belts are named after James Van Allen, who published an article describing the belts in 1958. So here's some CGI to show you what it looks like. These are radiation belts that you cannot go through. So going to the moon through radiation belts is impossible. There's no moving through these high radiation belts. Doesn't work. Not if you're a biological system, or even I don't think a mechanical system would work. But this is the point. So, conclusion, rockets in space are fairy tales, my friends, and it's all just one big show. They launch them, and if you look at the launch track, it always goes up, and then it comes back around. They tell, oh, it's going over the curve. It's not going over the curve. It's going up into the air, probably collecting some data from the firmament, who knows what they're doing, and coming back down. And then they go and get it from the ocean again and they tell you, oh, look, it's a successful mission. We did this. And they have their little CGI production studio to show you, quote unquote, what happened in space. But it's all one big show. During the live footage, often they'll pan away at very important times, or there'll be some sort of interruption or whatever that, if there's some view of the Earth that's going to refute their, shenanigans, they cut away and they pan away very quickly. They usually overlay CGI image over the rocket thruster with, a curved view of the Earth, or they have a fisheye lens. There's all sorts of tricks. They have endless tools at their disposal at this point in time with all the technology that's come out. They're probably doing tests on the firmament. Again, remember the whole occult idea of ascending out of this world and becoming like God, breaking into God's domain, that kind of thing. Which again, to me is just so stupid. I mean, do you really think, like, even if you could do such a thing, which of course you couldn't, but let's say you could somehow enter into God's domain, do you think God is not going to smite you immediately? Like, you think you're just going to go in there and enter into God's presence unannounced? Like, come on now. I don't understand these people at all. But there's no such thing as space, folks. We live in the space between the waters above and the waters below. There's no such thing as space. There's the waters above, and there's the firmament that's separating these things. How far do the waters extend? I don't know. That's a mystery. And what is in those waters above? I don't know either. I think it's also a very interesting mystery. But nevertheless, the Van Allen belt of radiation and energy is probably related to the firmament. The firmament has, we'll talk about this next time, but there's things that suggest that the firmament is solid. And there's things that suggest that the firmament is more like energetical, like a force field type of situation. So it's really interesting, but there's definitely obviously an energetic component to the firmament, to the Earth, to whatever's going on. Now, this is on Wikipedia. This is the Secrecy Act of 1952, which is very interesting. 51, actually, but I think it was enacted in 52. It's a body of United States federal law designed to prevent disclosure of new inventions and technologies that, in the opinion of selected federal agencies, hint, hint, NASA, present an alleged threat to the economic stability or national security of the United States. The Invention Secrecy Act allows the United States government to classify ideas and patents under secrecy orders, which indefinitely restricts public knowledge of them, i.e. total censorship of new ideas and groundbreaking information. The law applies to all inventions in the United States, regardless of what the idea or invention is, if a patent is applied for or granted. All patents filed within the United States are required to be reviewed, and thousands of ideas and inventions are manually reviewed every year. Any federal government agency with classifying powers may request that any patent be restricted under the Invention Secrecy Act. Ideas restricted by the Invention Secrecy Act's secrecy orders can be prohibited from any public disclosure. Sales to any party except the United States military industry or exports to other nations can be prohibited and can be even sealed from the public as classified. Any appeals are limited to the United States federal agency that itself restricted the ideas. So, in other words, good luck. The United States Patent and Trademark Office has investigated the possibility of restricting new technologies if those new ideas may be disruptive to existing industries, i.e. free energy and any other kind of thing like that. The Invention Secrecy Act has been criticized for lack of oversight and impacts on future scientific research by inventors, industry, attorneys, and academics. Interesting in and of itself, but what's even more interesting if you go scroll down and you see what kind of inventions are considered, things that are red flags for them. Declassified category review lists. The Federation of American Scientists and Stephen Aftergood obtained category review lists via Freedom of Information Act requests that had become declassified, detailing categories of topics or of inventions and concepts which the United States government summarily classify via the Invention Secrecy Act. In other words, in layman's speak, the following terms or categories are categories that are immediately considered as part of the Invention Secrecy Act, meaning you're not going to succeed in creating patents or information, basically inventions having to do with these particular things and be able to market them because they're going to be censored. So one of these, they tell you like contracts, explosives, blah, blah, blah. Let's see, this is not loading. Oh, okay, there we go. For some reason it was bugged out, but here we go. If we scroll down to like halfway, it says mapping, charting, and geodesy, or geodesy. Now that's an interesting category for invention secrecy, meaning all of the inventions related to mapping the Earth, charting, and geodesy are subject to basically being monitored and scrutinized through this Invention Secrecy Act. Well, what is geodesy? Well, let's see. Geodesy or geodetics is the science of measuring and representing the geometry, gravity, and spatial orientation of the Earth in temporally varying 3D. It is called planetary geodesy when studying other astronomical bodies such as planets or circumplanetary systems. Geodesy is an Earth science, and many consider the study of Earth's shape and gravity to be central to science. It is also a discipline of applied mathematics. So measuring the Earth, representing the Earth with some sort of invention that is able to basically calculate the Earth's form and representing the Earth is under the Invention Secrecy Act. Isn't that interesting? Now we know from a previous video, I believe episode 1 in this series, that there was that geodesic measurement from Brazil where they went to 2 buildings. And if you recall, if you have a curvature, you have a curved Earth, you have 2 buildings that are on, very far away from each other. They're pointing outward because they're over a curve. Whereas if it's a flat plane, the 2 buildings they're not pointing outward. So it's very simple measurement. You take geodesic equipment and you put it at the bottom of the buildings and at the top of the buildings. If there's a difference in the distance between these 2 pieces of equipment, which there should be, then you're on a curve, you're on a ball. If there's no difference between the distance of the top and the bottom of the building, then you're not on a curve because the buildings are pointing directly up relative to everything else because they're on a flat surface. They're not pointing outward as they would be on a curve over, I forget the distance it was, but it was pretty significant distance to where you should have enough curve where they're pointing outward and there would be a significant distance between the top and the bottom. And there's no difference. But that kind of stuff, that's subject to the Invention Secrecies Act of 1951. So I wonder why. That's really interesting, isn't it? Here's another one on invention secrecy. Speaking of which, all these inventors, good science over the last 100+ years. Let's see what happened to them. What happened to these scientists?
Let's play a game. I'm about to give you a bunch of random situations, and you can tell me how many random coincidences the world is full of. So this is Ari DeGo. He patented technology on free energy. He was headed to the airport to go meet some investors, but he never made it to his flight because he was found dead in his car. That's random. This is Stefan Marinov. He is the leader of the European free energy movement. In 1997, he had a major breakthrough, and as they were working on their prototype, he was found dead. What? Yeah, apparently he fell out of a window. This is Dr. John Mullen. He is a nuclear physicist that worked for one of the largest military contractors in the world. Apparently, he discovered something really big in the realm of energy, but unfortunately, before he could come out with this information, he died from arsenic poisoning. But don't worry, his girlfriend was the primary suspect. She was actually found dead in her apartment as well. They didn't go after any other suspects. Case closed. This right here is Dmitry Petronov. He invented a plasma battery that powered his 2-story house for 14 months. One day he went to go get bread from a bakery and was never seen again. Zachary Warfield was also working on a plasma battery. He actually met with Dmitry a couple of times where they would exchange notes. He mysteriously died in a boating accident in Washington, D.C. Eugene Malov was an expert physicist in cold fusion. He claimed to have a working prototype of a free energy device, but the day before he was going to go public, he was beaten to death. That's so random. Rory Johnson invented a cold fusion motor that generated over 500 horsepower. The Department of Energy took a restraining order against this technology so he could never publicize it, and you're never going to guess what happened to him. Everyone who knew him said he was super healthy, had no health issues, but he died mysteriously. Mark Tomian was awarded a patent for a zero-point energy system. After he developed his working prototype, he was found mysteriously dead, and the crazy thing is his research is missing. What? Or you might recognize this one. This is Stan Thompson. He developed a car that ran off of water. After developing his working prototype, he went to go to lunch with 2 investors so that he could gain money to push this technology out there. He died during lunch. His last words were, "I've been poisoned." Nikola Tesla believed he could make free energy. And all of his research was funded by guess who? J.P. Morgan, when he claimed to have figured it out and he wanted additional capital so that he could expand his inventions. J.P. Morgan shut him down. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that J.P. Morgan owned General Electric, he owned copper mines, he owned rubber mills. Anyways, the reason why the world has so much inequality, the reason why things are so expensive, it has nothing to do with the fact that we keep inventing technology that can help people, but we suppress it. Anyways, I don't know. What do you guys think? Isn't that crazy? What coincidences? The world is a weird place. Let's play a game.
Yeah, the world is a weird place because we live in the kingdom of darkness, and that kingdom is full of smoke and mirrors and shadows on the wall. So you need to realize that everything is a lie. Other than the Bible, of course, but everything is a lie. To some degree, everything is a lie. And we're going to keep going more and more into it. This is from NASA. This is their official documents. And these are documents that are military documents that describe their various things that they're doing in relationship to a flat and motionless Earth. All of their calculations, all of their projections are according to a flat and motionless Earth. This is rigid body equations of motions referenced to an arbitrary fixed point on the body. In this paper, the rigid body equations of motion over a flat, non-rotating Earth are developed. Projectile flight dynamics. This is from army.mil. A 6DOF rigid projectile model is employed to predict the dynamics of a projectile in flight. These equations assume a flat Earth. Singular arc optimal control. In our minimum time to climb problem, the aircraft is modeled as a point mass, and the flight trajectory is strictly confined in a vertical plane on a non-rotating flat Earth. Problem formulation. Coordinate systems. The motion of an object is usually described by rigid body equations of motions derived from Newton's laws. This section summarizes and notates 3 kinds of coordinate systems. The first is the Earth-fixed coordinate system, which is fixed to the Earth with a flat Earth assumption. Why are they assuming a flat, non-rotating Earth when we supposedly live on a heliocentric model with all these crazy motions in space? It's because we aren't living on a heliocentric model flowing around through space. This is another one. 3 targeting methods were considered, assuming a flat Earth using DTED data, and using range data, the evaluation revealed a descending utility order of DTED, flat Earth, and ranged based upon the system's stated requirements. These are all official aeronautics and astronautics, military documents that have been released and declassified. J. Spacecraft Closed Form Solution for Ballistic Vehicle Motion by Frank Barbera. A closed form solution is developed for the motion of a ballistic vehicle entering the atmosphere over a flat, non-rotating Earth. Why would you enter the atmosphere over a flat, non-rotating Earth if the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour over its axis and moving around the sun at 66,600 miles an hour? And all these motions happen simultaneously, and you need to re-enter the atmosphere. Don't you need to account for those motions? And yet their math consistently shows you that they project using a flat, non-rotating Earth. Very important. Here's some old pictures that I took and basically drew lines over because they say, look, there's a curvature. So if you can see, they say, look, these are little curvatures on the side of the picture, which of course is not true. If you draw a red line, these are some of the first pictures that were taken very high altitude. If you draw a red line, you see that there's complete parallel to the horizon. It's completely straight. And then there's suddenly it drops off a little bit here because this is distortion. It's not curvature. Here's another one. This is on a video called The First Photo of Earth's Curvature Snapped. And again, what happens is they quickly take science that's done, that disproves their model, and they flip it and they spin it and they gaslight you about it. Here's this picture, and you can look this video up yourself. They say this photo was taken over South America using special infrared film, whatever. Now look at this horizon. If you draw a completely straight line, there is a completely straight horizon. And then what happens, you start to see a drop off. You start to see a curve at the end. And they say, look, there's curvature. It's like, are you kidding me? This is distortion. This is not curvature, because if it were curvature, then you have to be consistent. And you draw a curved line that's parallel to that curve. Where does it go? Well, it cuts through the picture. It goes this way. So if it was curvature, then the picture should be like this curved line. And yet you see a completely straight line. This is what you do whenever you see these pictures that they tell you. Now, sometimes they get very clever. This one I had to rotate. This is actually like, sideways. So they do things with camera lenses and distraction to tell you, oh, look, it's curvature, but it's not. This was sideways, and they also took a picture of clouds. Of course, there's no such thing as sideways. This is what it was actually like, and they rotated it to the side to make you think like, oh, it's the side of the Earth. It's nonsense. They took the picture of a flat horizon, and they found places with clouds. You see, these clouds are shapes above the horizon. They're poofy clouds. And so they tell you, look, there's curvature, but it doesn't make any sense because there's two curves if that's the case. If you see the line and the bulge where it drops, so here's the cloud. It goes up over the line and it comes back down over the line. Then there's another cloud that shapes. These are clouds, folks. It's not the curvature of the Earth. The horizon line, if you look from here all the way to here, is completely flat. There's no curve. There are clouds, and they always find these places, like even when they supposedly do live satellite feeds, quote unquote, and they're flying over the Earth, they always fly over something that you can't tell where the land masses are. They're either some cloudy place or the ocean, because if they fly over the land masses and they basically show you where the land masses are, the artificial curve that they're superimposing onto the image through CGI reveals to you that they're lying to you. Because a curve, we looked at this in the first episode, where all you got to do is just, okay, fine, show me the curve, stop the frame, pick the landmass out, and do the math, and plot it out on a curve, because the curve makes the landmass in question, like we looked at, I believe, at Italy. The guy looked at Italy in that first episode we looked at, where this thing was over Italy, and Italy, the boot of Italy would have to be like half of the size of the Earth or something based on the curvature. It's just nonsense. So curvature actually refutes their whole theory. But these are old pictures, and of course, what do they show you? They show you a completely flat horizon. What's this? Oh yeah, this is the ISS. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. So what's the point so far? The point so far is that you have never a straight answer. NASA is full of lies, full of deception, just like their moniker, never a straight answer. They are constantly deceiving people with signs and wonders in the sky, just like Revelation 13. Again, I'm not saying NASA is the false prophet, but the false prophet deceives people by calling fire down from the sky, doing all of these signs and wonders in the heavens. And of course, NASA is part of the false prophet. They have a track record of deception, of occultism, of lying. They have financial incentive to keep lying to you by laundering all the money and doing all these shenanigans with it. And of course, science and observation consistently prove that NASA is lying. True science actually refutes NASA, but every time science is done that refutes their model, they spin it immediately with CGI and theories and conjectures and experts and all these things. The propaganda machine is very powerful when it comes to this particular lie. Because again, there's so many things that are foundational to the cosmological lie that if it comes apart, then the entire house of cards falls apart. That's why cosmology is so important. And of course, people say, oh, why are you focusing on cosmology? It's so divisive. I don't care if it's divisive. The truth is divisive. Cosmology is important because there are many deceptions that it's tied to. So you should know the truth. Now, we're going to look at a couple of challenges to all these things. We're going to look at like the ISS, gyroscopes, satellites, and eclipses. And all of these things, again, you could go much more into this yourself. My goal is to really just show you line item by line item. And of course, the first one is with the ISS, and this is a great video. There's a lot of things to debunk in the ISS based on its angular size, the size that they tell you, the speed that it's going at, how the height away from the Earth. There's so much to talk about with the ISS, and there's even videos of them supposedly being in the ISS doing all kinds of things people have outlined on BitChute especially. You can see their little hooks that they're holding them up to do the quote-unquote anti-gravity. There's so much nonsense with the ISS, but this video in particular is very unique. It's unique because it shows you, again, angular size. I told you this before in many other places. that the angular size thing always gets them because they have to inflate and exaggerate these sizes and distances of things. And eventually something comes up where it's like, wait a minute, that shouldn't be possible for me to be able to see this thing if it's the distance you're telling me it is and the size you're telling me it is. So let's have a look, because like with the planets, like with the other things we looked at with angular size, then it all comes crashing down.
Now, it's not every day that a space company exposes another space company's lies. But today, we're going to be looking at how the SpaceX satellite train completely debunks the notion of an ISS that is orbiting a ridiculous 17,500 miles around a spinning ball Earth. Now, this ISS is reportedly slightly larger than a football field. Have you ever seen the ISS physically being built? I haven't. So how do we know it even exists? Well, it doesn't, and today we're going to be looking at that. Now, I find it interesting when you compare two objects in the sky that are basically two different altitudes and significantly different in sizes, that we should be able to then observe that in our skies. The satellites are the first of a planned 12,000 satellite mega constellation. Now, I'm not sure if that's a sly way of them wanting to make artificial constellations that we see in the sky, but they've already received a number of complaints from astronomers and people alike. Now they want this 12,000 satellites to provide internet access to the people on Earth, which is probably the most stupidest idea anyway. I mean, I don't understand how anyone...
We'll talk about satellites, because it's gotten very complicated.
...would want to spend that sort of money putting these satellites into the sky when 5G is literally killing the market. Pun intended. Now, they supposedly launched 60 Starlink satellites into the atmosphere at a ridiculous altitude of 440 kilometers. Now, this footage was taken in the Netherlands of the satellite train. So pay attention to the size of the light that you see on each satellite. And keep in mind that the size of these satellites are reported to be the size of an office desk. Now, these satellites also appear to have, well, they say that they've got a solar wing, which is being depicted here by CGI. Now, we know how space companies are quite renowned for their CGI images. They love painting that little pretty picture of what space would be like, so you're going to have to use your imagination for the rest. Now, let's see what SpaceX CEO has to say about the solar arrays during the initial orbit. Following the chorus of concerns, SpaceX founder and CEO Elon Musk responded the satellite solar arrays had not yet been pointed at the sun. The solar arrays were not yet pointed at the sun when this footage was being captured. These office-sized desk satellites were apparently initially orbiting at 440 kilometers altitude. Okay, so here is some footage that people have captured of the satellites. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is that they just happen to look as bright as the ISS. The next thing that you'll notice is that they just so happen to be going the same apparent speed as the ISS. And it just so happens to look similar in size as the ISS. It's easy to see what's going on here, guys. Yet, since I think critically about what I'm saying, I get called the crazy conspiracy theorist. By far, the most reflective element of a satellite are its solar arrays. Once operational, the Starlink satellite solar arrays will be pointed away from the Earth to soak up the solar arrays, or the solar rays. In this position, the amount of reflection emanating from the arrays and the satellites as a whole should be reduced significantly. Now, listen to what he just said. Once they raise the solar arrays, the satellites as a whole should be reduced significantly. Keep this in mind. So then what is causing the underside of these office-sized satellites to light up as bright as the ISS? I mean, it can't be Earthshine because most of this footage was captured in the middle of the night. And it can't be the sun because, again, it's the middle of the night. Now, if you want to believe that these are being illuminated by the sun, then, again, I'll just refer you to what Mr. Musk said in the article. the amount of reflection emanating from the arrays and the satellites as a whole should be reduced significantly. And this is all happening when these things get to 550 kilometers altitude, because again, this footage was only captured at 440 kilometers with their quote-unquote initial orbit. Now, since the satellite solar arrays had not yet been pointed at the sun, as Elon said, it's safe to assume the bottom of the quote-unquote satellites are facing the Earth. Now, I highly doubt that each satellite was equipped with enough LEDs attached to the bottom of them to make them illuminate brighter than the ISS. My thought is that these are just there to be a spectacle for everyone to see on the initial orbit and for people to take photos and videos, to prove that there actually are satellites orbiting a spinning ball Earth, again, which is completely nonsensical. Now, remember guys, according to Elon, by far the most reflective element of a satellite are its solar arrays. Now let's move on. Let's see how the SpaceX satellites debunk the ISS. Let's have a look at the angular size comparison of the ISS and the size of one of these satellites. This is where it becomes very apparent, as there is not much difference at all. And this is the problem. Here is a size comparison of the ISS and a standard size office desk. Now, where the problem lies, as I mentioned, is the apparent size of the ISS. The ISS is supposedly at an altitude of only 408 kilometers, and we see the same apparent size of a SpaceX satellite at an altitude of 440 kilometers altitude.
You see the problem? So the ISS is supposed to be at 408 kilometers in the sky. That's what I said, the angular size stuff always gets them. But most people don't understand angular size or how to calculate, which actually is simply just go on an angular size calculator, type in the distance of the object and the diameter, and it tells you what the angular size is. So the ISS is 408 kilometers above the Earth, supposedly. These satellites, if you can call them that, quote-unquote satellites, are 440 kilometers, meaning they're higher than the ISS. There's nothing reflective about them because they hadn't launched their solar arrays yet. And they are the size of an office desk compared to the ISS, which is huge, theoretically, compared to these satellites. So they're higher than the ISS. They're exponentially smaller, and yet you can see them in the same way that you see the ISS in the sky. That means that what you're looking at is a fakery. It is fakery. It's all there in the sky. They're probably doing something with who knows what, some sort of flying contraptions to make you believe that you're looking at, a space station or whatever. But this is debunked. The Starlink satellites are debunking the ISS because of the angular size calculations.
Are you beginning to see the problem here? How is it logically possible that the ISS and a SpaceX satellite appear to be the same angular size in the sky when a satellite the size of an office desk is at an altitude of 440 kilometers and the ISS is the size of a football field at an altitude of only 408 kilometers? This is an entire 32 kilometers lower than the ISS. But the comparison of both objects when you look at the footage appear to be almost exactly the same size. Until now, we haven't actually been able to compare the apparent size of the ISS at its altitude with something else.
This is important because until now, they've been able to spin their little story. Again, it's just like with the sun or the moon. You look at the moon and you say, well, without any frame of reference, you could say that's, a kajillion miles away and a million miles across. Or is it really close? And, it's not the diameter is not too great. It's a smaller object of some kind. Well, of course, we know through the Bible that it's a local object and it's probably small. It's not some, 200,000 million miles away or whatever they're telling you it is. So you have some reference. But this is the point with the ISS. Up until now, there's been no way to compare it to anything. Because what you see in the sky, you see a little blip in the sky moving around and tell you, oh, it's this thing and it's this giant space station and it's, X amount of kilometers above the Earth. And you just believe their math because you have no other frame of reference. Now we have a frame of reference with the Starlink satellites, which again, they're not quote unquote satellites, We'll talk about that in just a second. But the Starlink satellites, we'll just call them that, now they're telling you, well, these are supposed to be 440 kilometers altitude, and they're this small. Oh, okay, well, now we have a frame of reference. We can compare apples to apples, and of course, when you do that, it's all just falls apart.
That is higher in altitude than the ISS, and of course, still visible to us. But now we have another object higher than the apparent ISS. We do have something to compare it to. This is now very apparent that the office desk satellites completely debunk the notion of an ISS flying over our head that are supposedly larger than a football field. Now, after seeing this video, you still believe that an object larger than a football field should have the same apparent size of an office desk that is 32 kilometers higher in altitude, then you need to get your eyes checked, and you need to start thinking for yourself. To make a simple analogy, you cannot have a semi-truck and a remote control car appear to be the same size from your vantage point when that truck is 32 kilometers closer to you than the remote control car. So, the question remains, how are these quote-unquote satellites being lit up so bright? Well, at the very least, as I mentioned earlier, SpaceX are doing exactly that. They're making you believe they have a train of 60 satellites orbiting a spinning ball Earth. The train of satellites is most likely a series of connecting high-altitude balloons, and with very bright lights on the bottom of them to give you the appearance that there are orbiting satellites in space. Now, as we know, NASA and other companies, just like Google, launch hundreds of high-altitude balloon satellites into the atmosphere every day. So it's really not so hard to comprehend the fact that SpaceX could launch their own series of high-altitude weather balloons into the atmosphere. Now, as for the ISS, what could it be? Well, we know for a fact that the actual ISS is underwater in NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Lab, and that there's a time schedule that you can look up to see the supposed passes of the ISS. Now, given the speed and the apparent size, it could very well be just a fast, high-altitude plane with some sort of reflective or holographic projection projecting the solar panels of the ISS. Again, we know that there exists holographic technologies to this scale, so it's not so far-fetched to think that NASA would be using this technology on a plane. Now, this is the footage I took of the ISS with my P900, and I managed to grab a screenshot and put it through a photo editing app. I basically just adjusted the levels, and the so-called solar panels started disappearing, and basically left a silhouette of a plane with wings. So there you have it, folks. SpaceX Starlink satellites debunk NASA's ISS hoax.
So, you can look more into this. Again, there are countless videos about their CGI shenanigans. Like he had some clips in this video, I think. And all of the nonsense that they do with the ISS. But this video was unique because, again, you actually have video empirical evidence of a frame of reference now that we can compare apples to apples, and it shows you very clearly that what's above you is not a space station floating around. And there's so many people that this is the space station, and now, of course, now that people are catching on to their shenanigans, like I said before, every lie has an expiration date, so they have to keep creating new lies. So what are they doing with the ISS? Oh, well, now suddenly I think it's like, what, in a year from now or something, it's reached its end of life and the ISS is going to come down. It's going to crash into the Earth because it's losing power or something. Some other nonsense to basically kill that narrative and begin a new one. This is what they do, folks. They do this constantly. So the ISS is nonsense. They use a combination of a lot of things. Green screens, the high-altitude airplane shots with the free fall CGI, probably some sort of contraption that flies in the sky that convinces people that's on a schedule that, oh, look, there's the ISS. The model from before with the green screen, the underwater stuff. They have an entire toolbox for their project to basically deceive you. So don't put anything past them. Angular size always gets them. Remember that. Angular size, meaning how big is something appear in your visual field? That's what angular size is. Angular size is a simple mathematical thing. You don't have to calculate it. There's angular size calculators on the internet. Just type in angular size calculator. You go there, you type in two numbers. The number that's how far away is it from you, and the number that's supposedly its diameter of this object. So if it's a planet, you just look up, you Google the planet's diameter and the distance. You put those numbers in and you will see that for all of the 5 planets that you can see in the sky, you should not be able to see them based on the numbers that they give you. That refutes to you their math. But of course, nobody does this because they don't know left from right with these things. They just take NASA's word as authoritative. Now, I want to talk about satellites because satellites are an interesting phenomenon, and they're not just basically weather balloons. A lot of people say, well, it's just weather balloons and NASA is full of hot air. Yeah, yes and no. In some sense they are, in some sense they're not, because that's not everything that they're doing. They have these contraptions that are solar powered. And I want to look through an email that somebody sent me. Let's see here. Where's you at? Okay, here we go. This is from Neil Miller. And we'll look at a lot of interesting things here. He says, I was watching your Day of the Sun episode and satellite balloons sparked my memory that I wanted to share something. In all my research and following various truth seekers or flat earthers, etc., all I hear anybody talking about regarding satellites is that they are in balloons. So we have to get a little bit wiser, folks, because it's not just balloons. Especially now they have all sorts of technology. Which I agree, balloons are big in the satellite industry, but all the satellite technology we have today doesn't come solely from balloons. I never see or hear anyone talk about other kinds of satellites like HAPS, LTA, long endurance, UAS, high altitude platform stations, high altitude pseudo satellites, etc. Many names, and they seem to now be steering away from the HAPS meaning of high altitude pseudo satellite, from that to high altitude platform station, probably because it's hilariously obvious when they were calling them pseudo satellites. Yeah, probably that's why people are catching on, and so they just change the tactic. When I went down the satellite rabbit hole, I read countless reports from hundreds of different companies in this arena, and it became clear that the vast satellite networks above us consist of more than just high-altitude balloons. I would be willing to bet those Starlink constellations people see at night are more likely LTA HAPS, aka airships, rather than balloons. I forget what LTA stands for, but HAPS, the high-altitude platform station. You'll see some pictures of them in just a second. I found there's also a vast array of UAS, UAVs working collectively with LTA airships, HAPS, etc. All the big names have their hand in this market in some way, shape, or form. So here they are. You can see these things. They're these solar powered, gliders basically. And there's so many different models. There are these little gliders. They're automated. They probably have some sort of AI program or something. There's these stratospheric balloons that are very popular as well. So there's all sorts of stuff. And we'll look at a few links. So if we just look, let's look at this one. This is SoftBank, high altitude platform stations. And these are companies that basically do this thing. Let's click on the video. What's it look like? See, this is a CGI animation, but
above the clouds, up in the sky, bordered by space is the stratosphere. SoftBank's next generation telecom system. High altitude platform station. HAPS.
So there's tons of stuff, folks, and these are just one of the people. Let's look at some AeroVironment. Let's look at some more. High altitude pseudo satellites. Gives you the video, same thing. Airbus. Let's see. Airbus Zephyr, the world's most advanced solar-powered high-altitude platform station. Here it is. They're building it. These are light things that can basically just cruise forever and ever and ever. They have solar energy. You see them beaming down information. Observers, they're in connection with the balloons. There's all kinds of networks that these things are part of. It's a very vast and complex network of aeronautical contraptions. Let's see, this is Boeing. Aurora Flight Sciences, a Boeing company. Solar-powered pseudo-satellite. Odysseus, paying homage to their mystery religion. Let's see.
During daylight, Odysseus uses its solar array to convert sunlight into electrical power. This electrical power is used to drive the propulsion motors and also stored in the batteries which provide energy for overnight flight.
Odysseus is able to sail oft over long periods of time and station keep over specific locations. Because of that, it is able to relay voice, internet, and other forms of communication.
The key advantages for monitoring applications are both the high vantage point that gives you the ability to see and hear long distances, and then also the persistence, or the ability to stay in one location and monitor over long periods of time.
The Odysseus aircraft is exactly what's required to catalyze very rapid advances in climate research through the use of lasers for the determination of species that control ozone, to the use of radar for ground-penetrating determination of ice volume and ice flow, to the determination of soil moisture. All of these aspects turn out to be the most important measurements you can make. Odysseus will go after these problems in a way that nobody ever imagined before.
I'm sure they're using it just for scientific research. But this is the thing. Here's Psi. This one is stratospheric platforms to improve life on our planet. Of course, they don't care about improving life. They care about destroying life. But this is the point. Connectivity. This is where the satellites have. It used to be just balloons, high altitude weather balloons, but now it's much more complicated. Translate from Czech to English. Sure, translate. Skyrider Stratocyst. It's a high altitude balloon. Let's see, what's it look like? Little CGI animation. Here it is. This is your satellite. This one is a balloon in this case, but there's many forms, right? They can have propellers, they can have balloons, they have high altitude gliders, anything that works, basically. On and on. You can find endless list of companies involved. Airbus, Auger, Bay Systems. You know, there's all these companies, 20 plus companies all over the world. There's even an alliance. You can look at that. Here's the HAPS Alliance, high altitude platform station, launching connectivity into the stratosphere, i.e. this is where your internet satellite comes from and your GPS. I mean, GPS isn't solely from this because they have all sorts of things to do GPS, but GPS is just an algorithm that they plug into your car. You're not getting it from your satellite. That's for sure. The funny thing is there's tons of articles talking about the things that Starlink claims to be doing. And we know they all partner together. So when Starlink comes out and says, hey, look, we're bringing connectivity to, Mozambique or Zanzibar, talking about bringing internet to remote parts of Africa via their Starlink satellite, quote unquote, networks, then you see articles like this. Let's take a look at these articles. No, I don't want to accept anything. How about no? Okay, accept selected. World Mobile launches Africa's first commercial telecoms aerostat, bringing connectivity to rural Mozambique. So this is a blimp. Of course, these are all one big club because they're all secret society members. So when one person does it, they all pitch in and they all probably cross-pollinate each other. But this is an internet blimp. There's no satellites, folks. These are internet blimps, signal blimps, phone blimps, or gliders or whatever else they're using. This is from CNN. World internet blimps are coming to Zanzibar, but can a UK company succeed where Google failed? So everybody's trying different things, very clever things that they're doing, but these are just blimps. They're not satellites in space being dragged around the Earth by Earth's gravity or whatever else. Reject optional cookies. They don't give you an option to reject everything. Airships could boost internet coverage and help close the digital divide in Africa and beyond. Here's how. This is from 2022. Airships. Airships are what's boosting the internet coverage, not satellites. Seems like a clear case of putting two and two together, in my opinion. I agree, Neil. Absolutely. Then on top of that, there's a company called StarSpec Technology. They are a proud partner of NASA. They develop space telescopes for balloons. No joke. Some images from their website look exactly like Hubble's images. I wonder why. Just browse around their website and you start to realize that our famous space telescopes are actually on balloons. Let's see, star spec. Can we see some demos of the supposed thing? There's... Anyway, you see they got these little star camera. They have a star camera that they put on these various blimps and tardigrade ADCS. So anyway, yeah, see I keep flipping, which is annoying. You see the satellite, it's got a quote unquote satellite, it's got a little thing picture through it. So these things they are doing signs and wonders. Here's a picture actually. It seems like of one of these quote unquote telescopes. And they're launching it into quote unquote space, but it's really just floating around in the stratosphere and getting probably in-depth pictures of the firmament is what, again, these people want to, you have to remember that this is the occult, folks. You cannot divorce heliocentrism from the occult. What are these people doing up there? What do you think they're doing? Taking pictures of the firmament. They're trying to see what's inside and past the firmament. They're trying to see where's God, what's he doing, where are the angels at. We want to see for ourselves and probably try to break in there somehow. But again, this is what they're doing. And then they alter the images and they Photoshop them, as you clearly saw. So these people are occultists. I made a little collage a while back, but nobody seems to ever mention this aspect of the Earth satellite systems, and I don't know why. I found it's highly beneficial when discussing with someone who doesn't know the truth about cosmology yet. Yeah, also why this is important, because we need to be a little more nuanced. Anytime I've told someone that satellites are on balloons, they don't believe it. But when I tell them, Google image search LTA HAPS, an eye-opening light bulb goes off and they immediately think, this is actually possible. WTF. My father-in-law got Starlink internet not long ago, and I said, do you know what these actually run on? It's not a sphere orbiting satellites, I'll tell you that. Google LTA HAPS. He was pretty amazed, and he had no rebuttal. I love how they show you exactly how quote-unquote satellite internet works with their animated pictures, too. So here's your satellite internet. Here's the terrestrial base station. Here's the little, autonomous glider that's flowing around. It's beaming, signals to the gateway, to the phones. You have the cloud internet. You have the satellite dishes, quote unquote satellite dishes, and you have the towers. It's a network of different things for sure. It's not as simplistic as maybe the flat earthers are making it, but it's also not what they're telling you, which is all of these satellites floating around the Earth and in real time, and the Earth is moving at thousands and thousands of miles an hour, and they're somehow being dragged along with it. I mean, it's just nonsense, absolute nonsense. Anyway, you may already know this stuff, but I just wanted to spread the word so hopefully more people realize how Earth satellite systems and satellite internet works as a whole. I pasted my notes of various other companies I researched in the past in case you're interested. Be well, amigo. Thank you, Neil. Very good research, good stuff, and people do need to know about these things because it has gotten much more complicated, and especially when you're dealing with, people who are skeptical of these things, then it's good to have these rebuttals to say, look, they are not just weather balloons, absolutely, even though, again, NASA is the largest consumer of helium on Earth, so that should tell you everything. But it's also not what they're telling you. It's a complex system, and now all these space companies are making money getting contracts by doing all these things that, Elon Musk is just one of them. He's just one of them. He's not the only one. So that's it for satellites. Now let's talk about gyroscopes. Some people say that gyroscopes and airline navigation proves that we live on a ball, which of course isn't true for many reasons. This is a video of a professor talking about gyroscopes. We'll talk about it. If the science is a little over your head, don't worry. It's not that complicated.
Hello, flat earth researchers, debaters, and debunkers. When it comes to the physics of gyroscopes, like those conventionally used in aircraft to keep the plane level and at a constant height above the surface of the Earth, it is often claimed by defenders of the globe that gravity is pulling the gyroscope down, and the gyroscope is therefore following the curvature of the Earth, even though the gyroscope doesn't move. Well, let's hear what the physics professor Walter Lewin has to say about gyroscopes and whether that does or does not fit into the idea that gyroscopes will naturally follow the curvature of the alleged globe Earth.
So spin angular momentum has the property of stabilizing things. And you will see that addressed in one of your assignments when I want you to address that quantitatively. This is the basic idea behind inertial guidance systems. In inertial guidance systems, you have a spinning wheel, at least in the days that the guidance system had mechanical wheels. But that spinning wheel is mounted in such a way that you cannot put a torque on the axis of rotation of the spinning wheel. That's the way it's mounted. We call it 3-axle gimbaled gyros. So the moment that you put a torque on it, the housings, in this case the yellow and the black housing, will start to rotate. And you never manage to get that torque on the spinning wheel. You never get it on this axis. And therefore, if now you put it on your boat or you put it in a plane, a missile for that matter, if you can never put a torque on the spinning wheel, and if the angular momentum for spin is in this direction, it will stay there forever and ever, assuming that we have no frictional losses. And if then the plane turns, the direction of the spin angular momentum will not change. But what will happen, of course, is that this yellow frame will rotate, or this black frame will rotate. And in these bearings here are shaft encoders. And they sense the rotation that the outer housing makes in order to keep this thing pointing at the same direction. And that signal is being fed back to the automatic pilot, and that keeps the plane flying in the direction that you want to. So you use as a reference all the time the spin angular momentum of your gyro, which is now mounted in such a way that you cannot put a torque on it even when the plane changes direction. And I want to show that to you.
So now he's going to spin up the gyroscope, just like the gyros in the artificial horizons of aircraft are spun up while the aircraft is still on the ground before it takes off from the departure point. And as he said, to ensure that there is a reference point for the departure point with the axis of rotation of the gyroscope remaining in the same position throughout the flight, no matter which way the aircraft goes, up, down, left, right, sideways, backwards, forwards. The gyroscope will remain pointing in precisely the same direction it was when it was spun up.
Okay, this is the direction of my spin angular momentum. And I'm the airplane. And I'm going to fly. Look at that spin angular momentum. It has no respect for me. It stays in the same direction, no matter how I fly.
See how it stays the same? Because they need to know if they're going to crash into the ground or not. So they need something that's level. Do you see how this actually refutes the globe? At least the mechanical ones. Now they have digital ones with, CGI and algorithms that NASA programs. But the mechanical ones refute the idea of a globe. Because they stay the same level because of the axial precession, the momentum, right? And as a result, nothing is pulling down on it. Even if gravity existed as a force, and you'll see when you put a weight on it, it'll precess either to the left or to the right. But even if you put a weight on it and gravity was pulling on that weight, the only effect that would have is move to the right or to the left. It would never come down because you can't, because it's spinning. The torque is not going to let you do that. Meaning that if the Earth was a curve and he put a weight on that, you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second, to move it to the left or to the right, because that's what happens when it's spinning. Gravity would pull on that weight, and as a result would move the weight to the right or to the left. And eventually you would fly off the curve of the Earth. But of course they're going to say, well, gravity's actually, controlling the plane going over the curve. I mean, it's just so many conjectures. You have to believe to believe it. Honestly, you have to believe it. You aren't basing it off science or on empirical evidence, because what this tells you is that this is programmed analog to a flat, motionless plane, just like the equations that all the military uses.
And the error signals that come from the bearings of the yellow housing and the black housing, those arrow signals are fed back to the automatic pilot, and so the plane will stay on course. Now what I can do for you to come to a final test on your thinking, this wheel is suspended in such a way that there is no gravitational torque on it, like there was here. But I can put a torque on it by simply putting some weights on the axis.
Now watch this.
And what do you think will happen now if I put some weight here on the axis? So the wheel is spinning, but now I'm going to put a torque on it here. It is spinning in this direction. Angular momentum is pointing straight at me, away from you. I'm going to put a torque on like this, putting the weight there. Torque will be in this direction. What will the spin angular momentum do? Torque is in this direction, spin angular momentum is in this direction. Spin angular momentum will start to chase the torque. Watch it.
You see?
There it goes. The spin
It's not going down. It's going to the left or right. It's on the east-west axis.
angular momentum is chasing the torque. You see exactly the same thing that I've shown you before. And if I make the torque higher, then the precession frequency will go up. See, it stops now immediately when I take it off. Put it back on again. Continues. Put more on it. Goes way faster.
Because it's spinning. So even more weight, all it does is just make it spin east-west more. So the point is that if gravity were a force, even if gravity existed and you were on a ball and you used a gyroscope, a mechanical one, you would not be able to make the gyroscope point down to help it, to make it curve over the curve of the Earth. That's nonsense. But that's basically the point, is that the gyroscope proves to you that you're on a flat surface. Otherwise, you'd fly over into quote-unquote space in their model. But of course, they're going to have all sorts of conjectures.
What happens now if I put the weight on this side? So I change the direction of the torque. If I put it on this side, torque is now in this direction. Spin angular momentum is in this direction. It's going to reverse direction. There we go. And you see it does. Amazingly non-intuitive. If you have problems with this, you're not alone. See you Wednesday.
So there we had a demonstration of real physics with practical applications in the real world, which can only work above a flat, stationary Earth. They just would not work if the Earth was a spinning ball. Gyroscopes wouldn't be used because of the properties that they have. And as he said, it was amazingly non-intuitive when he added the weight or mass, because we would expect the increase of mass on one side to make the gimbal of the gyroscope point down towards the Earth. But because it was spinning, and because gyroscopes always maintain the axis at which they were spun up at, the gimbal did not tilt. And so it becomes non-intuitive. And therefore, aircraft simply are not following any alleged curvature of the globe Earth when they are using gyroscopes to maintain level flight.
Now, this is what it is, folks. Again, when you're at ground level on a ball and you're spinning that gyroscope to be able to calibrate it for your ground level, right? For your position, because you're level with the ground, so that you can be level no matter how high you fly up, so you know you're not going up or down. That point on a ball is relative. Do you get it? The farther you fly, the farther the horizon is dropping underneath you because of the curvature. Meaning, the farther you fly, you can't listen to the gyroscope because the gyroscope is never going to point down. It's going to be level to the tangent line that you're on in the ball, if that makes sense. So eventually you'd fly off the Earth if you were on a ball. Of course, again, all this stuff is nonsense, but that's why today they don't use analog gyroscopes anymore. And if they do, then that proves to you that you're not on a ball. They use all sorts of algorithms and guidance, navigation, control, and all this type of stuff where these things are pre-programmed with algorithms, just like your GPS on a car, that these things are algorithmic based. They're computational. And of course, they give you a little CGI model of what's happening, but it's not what's actually happening. And if you look into it, the people who are providing all of these algorithms is NASA for all these guidance navigational controls. So they're providing to you an algorithm and a representation of what's happening, again, inserting themselves between you and reality with the narrative. No, this is what's happening. Look, you're over here. Wait a minute. An analog gyroscope, which is a simple machine, it's a very simple machine, proves to you that you're not flying over a ball. It's absolute proof. And of course, there's many videos of pilots confessing, like, yeah, we don't live on a ball. I know that, but I'm not going to say that I'm a flat earther because people will ridicule me. And some pilots are deceived on this. They believe they are on a ball and that they're following the curvature of the Earth as they fly. So they are looking at what they see, even though they're up in the sky all the time, seeing the flat horizon. They see the horizon rise to meet the eye level, which is impossible on a ball. And yet they still believe these things. So you get a mixed bag, but there are many videos, especially on BitChute, I believe, of pilots basically. In fact, I wonder if we can look it up. Let's see. Pilot flat Earth. Again, I'm not a flat earther. I don't suggest that you be one, but let's see. Is there anything? Oh, because I spelled pilot like Pontius Pilate. I was like, what the heck? That's funny. There you go. See, here we go. Here's retired F-16 pilot says the Earth is flat. Dutch airline pilot explains why the Earth is flat. This one talks about gyros too. This one's it's a little bit longer. Actually, no, it's a 5-minute video. But you have a ton of these. Retired pilots, retired military pilots. So many people come in and saying, yeah, the Earth is flat, bro. It's not what you've been told. There's so many. And so you can look into that yourself. Again, you could spend hours and hours every day on this particular topic and still not get through it. That's not my goal today. My goal is to really show you that together, the body of evidence is consistent with everything, is that you've been lied to. These people in charge are occultists. They're serving the devil. And ultimately, all of this is designed to add force and power and authority to the deception so that people can come rally under the beast. That is the end that you cannot forget. Now, let's talk about eclipses. Eclipses are another one. People argue that NASA has predicted eclipses with such certainty and accuracy, and therefore it proves that the heliocentric model is true, which of course is not the case. There's some initial problems with eclipses that can't be reconciled in a ball, and they make no sense. They are the following. The eclipse, when you look at it, the shadow portion that's coming over the sun is going from west to east, which does not make sense if the moon, which also rises in the east and sets in the west, is traveling across the sun. And the moon is faster than the sun. So the question is, well, at least in the heliocentric model, I mean, in the local model, the moon does what the sun does, but faster. In the heliocentric model, the moon is the one moving in between you and the earth, or in between the sun and the earth. So the moon is the one moving, and the moon rises in the east, sets in the west. So if you look at an eclipse, of course, with some protective eye gear on, you will see that it doesn't start covering the sun from west. Of course, on the camera, it's backwards. But anyway, imagine from east to west. It doesn't do that. It goes backwards, which doesn't make any sense. Of course, you can see the moon in broad daylight. That's something that's observable. But you never see the moon approaching the sun on an eclipse and then covering it, and then you see the moon again in the sky. You don't, because the moon doesn't travel from west to east. It travels from east to west. So what could be happening? I'm not sure. I think there's some interesting theories. We'll talk about this in the next episode as well, with the problems with the flat Earth model. But there's probably some sort of electromagnetic thing going on. If you put a magnet up to a TV, it creates an interference pattern. It creates like a black, circle, basically, where the fields are, I believe, canceling each other out. But there's an interference pattern that happens. And so my guess from everything, just an educated guess, is that there's something electromagnetic happening. Because we live in an electromagnetic universe, these things are electromagnetic phenomenon. The sun is probably some sort of electromagnetic phenomenon of some kind. And so there's things that are intersecting with their fields and is creating this phenomenon that we see. Some people have hypothesized a third object. Of course, the New Agers are all about Nibiru and all this kind of stuff, but the Bible doesn't say there's a third object. The Bible doesn't say that God created, the sun and the moon and then, the black sun or something like that. So who knows what it is? It's an interesting question for sure. Another thing with eclipses is that the path of eclipses are all over the place. And it's not consistent with the model of the heliocentric idea that the Earth is here and the moon is going like this around the Earth, and it's eventually creating a solar eclipse. And if you look at this, if you look at some of these pictures, this is from Christian Observer. This is about the I believe the eclipse that recently happened in 2024. But you can see this on their model, the curves and the arcs of the eclipses go in completely two different directions. How is this possible, given that the Earth is here and the Earth and the moon is orbiting around the Earth like so? It would have to do like strange things for it to create these patterns that we see. If you see these, they go all over the place. Sometimes they go from north to south. Sometimes they go from south to north. So they're crisscrossing all the time, these eclipse paths, and that doesn't make any sense. How is that possible on an Earth with a moon that's a fixed orbit? That doesn't make any sense. They have yet to reproduce this through empirical evidence. Of course, they could probably produce it through CGI, but that's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. Another thing is that the shadows that they tell you doesn't actually work the way that shadows actually work in real life. For example, if we look at this picture, let's see. Oh, what happens on a solar eclipse, blah, blah, blah. Where is the picture? Here it is. This is how it supposedly works, right? Here's the sun, which, by the way, the sun's rays don't do that. They go outward. But anyway, here's the moon, and it creates this nice geometric little shape, and it tells you this is how it works. But this is not how it works, folks. I mean, just do it yourself. Take a ball, take another smaller ball, and then, take a really powerful light and move away from it and see what happens to these shadows and see if you can reproduce what they're telling you. This is nonsense. It doesn't match reality. Another thing that's important is that lunar eclipses actually disprove the ball model. There's going to be a video here we're going to watch from BitChute that shows to you that there's a lunar eclipse at the same time that the sun is in the sky. And that's impossible because on the heliocentric model, the lunar eclipse is caused by the sun, the Earth being between the moon and the sun. Get it? So here's the Earth in my hand, here's the moon, and here's the sun. So you should not be able to see both the moon and the sun in the same sky on a heliocentric model if there's a lunar eclipse. But yet there's video proof of that. And you can look, this is one of many. Let's see. I had it from 47. Let's see.
And as you can see, we're getting a little bit brighter out here. You can see the shadow creeping across the moon. It's a little hard to see, I'm sure, in the camera, but from here, we can see it nice and clearly. It's about a third of the way covered. The moon's starting to turn nice and orange.
Lunar eclipse.
As we're on the right shoulder, you can see downtown St. Louis in the nice early morning sun, which is getting very bright on the eastern horizon behind us. Yeah, we'll get that in there again.
There's the sun.
See, it's practically day here yet.
Coming up.
We still have the full moon out, which is slowly eclipsing.
Eclipsing. So you have many videos such like this. You have to look for them. But there's videos of the moon in the sky at the same, lunar eclipse in the sky at the same time that there's the sun in the early morning, which is not possible, folks. It's not possible. Now, let's see, what else do we have here? This is the oblong lunar eclipse problem. This is another thing that's also important, which is what I was talking about, how there are people who have debunked this idea of the lunar eclipse happening because of the shadow of the Earth. It's not. It's not. And you'll see that the same rule applies to the phases of the moon. It's not a shadow of a spherical object. It is something else happening. So this is an interesting, let's see, from 704.
The lunar
Let's see where we at. Oh, actually, this is the whole video. The next one is the
eclipse is alleged to be caused by the ball Earth, casting a shadow on the ball moon.
See that? Look at the shadow here. Look at the shadow, how it's oblong. It's not perfectly spherical.
In our model here, the shadow cast on the moon by the ball Earth starts off very small and oblong, and then becomes big. When we observe a lunar eclipse from Earth, it stays like a cookie bite, and it never changes, but as you can see here, the shadow of Earth starts out very small and is oblong and not perfectly round as it goes through. You can see that it changes size and shape from a narrow ellipse to a circular curve. This does not match what we observe from Earth. For those willing to think, it is clearly apparent that the darkening of the moon is not caused by the globe, Earth, casting a shadow. You may now be asking, if it is not the Earth causing the eclipse, then what is it? There are many theories that you can find in the eclipse section on the FAQ page of the Flat Earth Clock app, but you need to remember, falsification is independent of replacement.
Let's see, look at that. Yeah, you can tell. See these oblong, let's see, let's get a couple more frames. I wish they didn't have this stupid play button here. You see, you can tell, like, that's not what happens, folks. The oblong shape, because it's a sphere. If the moon was a ball and the shadow of the Earth was being cast on it, it would create these effects, which we can empirically reproduce with very simple experiments. Here's another one. This is from the artist that I was telling you about, and he, from about, let's see, 704. Yeah, this guy's a visual artist, and he's going to debunk these lunar eclipses. Let's see.
Or the moon. And speaking of the moon, allow me to now share the information that will close the case forever on the possibility or the falsity of the moon being a sphere. The moon is 100% absolutely not spherical, and any lunar eclipse proves it. And you can prove it too. All you need is a light source and 2 spheres. On the right, I'll be showing video footage of past lunar eclipses that we are all familiar with. And on the left, I will be showing what a shadow moving over a sphere actually looks like. A lunar eclipse is not, I repeat, is not a shadow of a sphere or anything else circular moving across a spherical object. How do I know? There are 4 critical points of observation everyone should be looking at. And I like to call these the conformation to surface factor, the shadow diffusion factor, the sine wave or S factor, and the reflected light factor. Firstly, I would like to point out the consistency of how a shadow naturally moves along varied surface types. This is the conformation factor. A shadow will conform to any shape that the surface takes, thus, in a way, revealing the true shape of an object. If a shadow moves along something rigid like stairs, it will take the stairs' shape, revealing the level differential from step to step. If a shadow moves along a concave object like a bowl, the shadow will stretch and skew, revealing the concavity of the bowl. If a shadow was to move over the surface of a sphere, it would stretch and skew in a spherical manner, wrapping and receding as it bevels and distorts along the sphere's surface. Note that this does not and has never happened on the surface of the moon during an eclipse. Which brings us to our next factor, the shadow diffusion factor. Note, the shadow is more crisp on the edge of the bowl than it is in the lowest portion of the bowl, and sharpens as it rises back up to the edge or the source of the shadow. Note also that on a sphere, the shadow is most diffused or scattered around the edges as the sphere's surface recedes, and it is the most sharp or defined on the closest portion of the sphere. This is because the closer the source of the shadow is to the surface, the more defined its edges. The further the source of the shadow is from the surface, the larger and more faded or diffused it becomes. Another way to say this is if you place an object on a surface with a light source above, the object's shadow will appear most sharp when the object is at rest. But lift the object closer to its light source and you will see the shadow lose its crisp edges and dull or fade away, sometimes to the point where little to no shadow remains. This is the shadow diffusion factor, and in conjunction with the first factor, the conformation to the surface factor, the shadow not only rises and falls, stretches and skews with the surface, but also sharpens and dulls. These 2 factors are almost all we need to find the true topography or shape of the moon. Yet one factor is missing. This is called the sine wave factor or S factor. Because the moon is said to be a sphere, the shadow that is projected onto the moon should also take on the characteristics of the sphere. This critical factor does not appear on the moon's eclipses whatsoever. The sine wave factor, or the S factor, is what happens as an object, round or straight, spherical or bent, passes over a sphere's surface. As the shadow moves onto a sphere, it is wrapping around its curve. Starting from the outer edge and moving towards the middle, the shadow takes on the spherical contour and bends upward at its height, then falls backwards in a barrel distorted manner. The shadow will always follow the closest edge due to perspective. The shadow will continue to create the S shape until it reaches the halfway point. As the shadow moves beyond the halfway point, it begins to bevel outward again in a barrel distortion manner. When a shadow moves along a 3D sphere, the center or closest part of the sphere to the observer is the most flat, and the shadow's shape and size the most true to life. The sphere will never be flat, but the bigger the sphere is, the less acute the angle of its curvature. So, because the innermost portion of the sphere is the closest to the observer, the less curvature is observed. However, when we observe any lunar eclipse, there is no wrapping, stretching, skewing, sharpening, or dulling of the shadow. In fact, every single lunar eclipse looks as if there is one flat disk moving across another flat disk. As the circular shadow moves along the moon, it maintains.
See that? This is science, folks. Empirical evidence. This explanation matches reality. What they're telling you does not match reality.
Its circular shape the whole way at the same pace. No stretching, no skewing, no sharpening or dulling. Hopefully you all understood that, as it was quite hard for me to put into words. Those three factors are good enough for us to see that the moon is not a sphere, but one factor is needed to realize the moon's surroundings, and that's reflected light. When another object under the same light source is in close proximity of the object in question, i.e. the moon, it should have light bouncing off of the Earth and reflecting onto the moon. When another object under the same light source is in close proximity of the object in question, it should have light bouncing off and reflecting onto it. What I mean is this. The closer another object comes to the sphere, the brighter the light it's reflecting will appear. In the made-up heliocentric lie, they tell us that the moon is reflecting the light to the Earth. But what about the bigger object, the Earth? Does it reflect and bounce light to the moon? It should, but it doesn't. Because if it did, we would then have no new moon phase, and instead more of a dull moon phase or a dim moon phase. Meaning, as the moon wanes to darkness, it should then be illuminated by the Earth. We should still be able to see the same face of the moon that we see every day, because the moon is always facing us. However, it should be dimmer and not luminous, because the Earth should reflect its massive light towards the dark moon. Especially when the moon is further and closer to the Earth on its supposed elliptical path, it should brighten and dim in its new moon phase. I repeat, speaking exclusively from new moon to new moon, the moon itself should still be visible on that new moon phase, transitioning from dim to slightly brighter, back to dim, as the moon moves in its elliptical orbit. The object also should reflect the color of its surface and the color of its light source. A gold chain will reflect gold. A green ball will bounce green light, and its reflection on the object will be green. The sun's light is yellow or warm, while the moon's light is blue and cool. Astronauts say the moon is black and white, whatever that means. But if that means it's a scale of grays running from white to black, then it is impossible for the moon to change the sun's light from a warm color. And
people have done this too, where it's colder in the moon's light than it is in the shadow, which is interesting.
Temperature to a cool color and temperature. Yes, the moon's light is colder than the moon's shade. I can understand the moon cooling down the sun's rays and making it less hot, but in no way is it possible for it to actually make the sun's rays colder than the shade at night. Meaning, if you stepped into the moonlight at night, the temperature of the sun's rays reflecting off the surface of the moon and onto your face, or thermometer, should be greatly reduced, but not colder than if there was no moon at all. When the moon comes out at night, the temperature drops because of the moon's light. This has been confirmed by many experiments using digital thermometers. But staying on course, there is no sign of a reflected light being thrown onto the moon by Earth. What does this mean? This means that the new moon has actually disappeared. While the moon is waxing and waning, we can see the rest of the moon that is not illuminated. However, when there is a new moon, or no sunlight being reflected, we do not see a dim spherical object traversing our sky. In fact, in the daytime, we should still see a dim object traversing the sky, but we have never seen either of these things in our realities. Can you ever remember seeing a dim, non-luminous moon high in the sky at the new moon phase? I repeat, at the new moon phase, not while it's waxing or waning, and not when it's near full. Have you ever seen a dim, non-luminous moon high in the sky at the new moon phase? Now that this information is being brought to light, you will never be able to help but notice something you've never noticed before. That on an eclipse, the shadow has never stretched along the surface of a spherical moon. No stretching, no skewing, no sharpening in or fading away. Not obscured and distorted in sine wave-like motions, no light reflecting onto the moon from Earth, nothing. Not a single shred of evidence remains that the moon is a spherical body orbiting around or above our Earth. This 100% discounts and debunks any further argument or perspectives that hold to our moon being a sphere in the sky or reflecting the sun's light. This information is in line with the laws of the reflector. The reflector can only reflect light brilliantly if the surface of the reflector is concave, but the outside of the sphere is convex, and convex surfaces only reflect a portion of the light back to the viewer's eye. But a concave surface reaccumulates the spreading light, or reconcentrates the light back to the observer's eye, whereas the convex surface, like the surface of a ball, further scatters the light. If the moon were over 250,000 miles away, then we would only see a portion of the moon, which we would call the hot spot, or the bright spot, or the highlight of the sphere. But there are no hot spots or highlights or bright points on the sphere of the moon indicating the sun's direction. Instead,
you can do this yourself too, even with your phone. Just look up at the moon on a full moon, take a picture of it, and look at the shot. It is a light. It's a light source because God made two lights in the sky, just like the Bible tells you.
we have a perfectly evenly lit luminescent moon that gives us cold blue light. In fact, when we look at a full moon, it appears to be flat because the edges of the moon are just as bright as the center or any other part on a full moon. Now that your eyes are opened to the physics and the facts, what will you do? Will you choose to continue believing this lie or observe it for yourself? Anybody can do it. Just go outside and look up. And in case you're wondering about what Neil deGrasse Tyson has to say on the matter, just look how he debunked himself. He went on social media, yes, supposedly the world's leading astrophysicist, anyway, went on social media and posted this ridiculous photo of what he thinks the shadow of a flat Earth would look like on the moon. Now, of course, he believes that the moon is a sphere, or at least that's what he says. But if that's the case, then why is there no stretching or skewing of this shadow? Once again, it goes to show you how important it is to be observant and to rely on your own senses. It also displays the innate sense for acute observation to a true artist. We have to combine both worlds, science and spirituality, the abstract and the literal, the arts and the politics, the left and the right brain.
And I think he gets a little bit new agey here at the end. But either way, this guy was an artist. He's a sculptor, a painter of some kind. And he's telling you all of these things from an artistic perspective, which is very interesting because I haven't seen that before. But the moon is not a sphere, folks. It's not. And we talked about the highlight, where the light comes on a tangent on a sphere and basically creates the highlight point before as well. So it's good to see that. But who knows what the moon is? I don't know what the moon is. I think it's certainly fun to speculate. But the point is that the eclipses, especially lunar eclipses, disprove the heliocentric model. But both do. Both solar and lunar eclipses disprove the ball quite easily. People argue that NASA predicting eclipses as proof that they have the right model is nonsense. NASA, you will find out, took all of their predictions and built off of previous people, which built off ultimately the Babylonians and Assyrians. The ancients, remember, the ancients were able to predict a lot of things. The Mayans, the Mayan calendar, people built giant buildings in accordance with the luminaries, like the sun and the moon. All of these things that we can't even build today. These giant, like the pyramids, like the Giza pyramid is aligned with the belt of Orion or whatever. All of these things that are just so huge and yet perfectly aligned with the luminaries of the sky. People watched the sky. That's all they did. And they understood the sky. And yet, universally, we saw that their model of the universe was very different than what we have today. It was a flat and closed model, which, of course, is what the Bible tells you. All of them believed the same thing, and all of them were able to create astounding feats of engineering and astronomy, and yet they had a very different model. So what does that tell you? It tells you, first and foremost, if you're honest, that there is at least another way to explain what you see, not just only through heliocentrism. That's the first thing it should tell you. The second thing it should tell you as we go through this is you'll see that NASA isn't doing anything. All they did is rip off those mathematical calculations from previous cultures and present them to you as, oh my gosh, this one guy we'll look at, his name is Fred Espenak, the mystery eclipse. He just came up with all these things. He just calculated them, just like all the other people in history where they're lauded up as these heroes. So this is Fred Espenak from Wikipedia. He's a retired emeritus American astrophysicist. He worked at the Goddard Space Flight Center. He's best known for his work on eclipse predictions. Let's see if we can Go just a little bit more here. All right. He was employed at Goddard Space Flight Center, where he used infrared spectrometers to measure the atmospheres of planets and solar system. He provided NASA's eclipse bulletin starting in 1978. He's the author of several canonical works on eclipse predictions, such as the 50-year canon of solar eclipses and 50-year canon of lunar eclipses, both of which are standard references on eclipses. The first eclipse he saw was the solar eclipse on March 7th, 1970, which sparked his interest in eclipses, and he has since seen over 20 eclipses. Together with John Mias, he published the 5 Millennium Canon of Solar Eclipses in 2006, which covers all types of solar eclipses, partial, solar, total, annular, and hybrid, from 2000 BC to AD 3000, and the 5 Millennium Canon of Lunar Eclipses in 2009, which lists all the lunar eclipses in that time span. Later, he published the more compact 1,000-year Canon of Lunar Eclipses in 1501 to 2500, the 1,000-year Canon of Solar Eclipses, and the 21st Century Canon of Solar Eclipses. He's also a co-author with Mark Littman and Ken Wilcoxoff of Totality, Eclipses of the Sun. He was the co-investigator of an atmospheric experiment flown on the Space Shuttle Discovery. So is he indentured and in deep with these people? Absolutely. He's also known as Mr. Eclipse. He gives public lectures on eclipses and astrophotography. Astronomical photographs taken by Fred Espenak have been published in National Geographic, which, remember, came from the Cosmos Club, Newsweek, Nature, New Scientist, CL at the Space, and magazines. So he's very well known. He's a very influential figure. And this one guy, before we go on, I want you to realize, again, it's the same narrative that they always tell you. It's this one genius that came along and just changed science forever with all of his calculations that they prop up. And of course, it's the same old narrative. Do you really believe that one dude suddenly came up in the 1970s and he calculated all of the eclipses that we've ever had perfectly, and he just figured it out? Kind of like Cavendish figured out gravity, kind of like Newton figured out all the things he figured out, and Einstein and so on. Or is this just the same old thing we're seeing over and over again? Of course, you should know the answer to that because I've given you 2,500 plus years of history, and that's why you need history. Otherwise, you read something about Fred Espenak and say, oh, he must have been a genius. He just kind of figured it out. Of course, you know better by now, hopefully. So this is from space.com, and this is the original mystery eclipse. How a 19th century astronomer calculated the dates of over 13,000 eclipses. For nearly a century, the 1887 book Canon of Eclipses was considered to be the authoritative work on solar and lunar eclipses. So did Fred Espenak figure it out, or did he get it from somebody else? If one were to mention the name mystery eclipse, most amateur and professional astronomers would immediately recognize it as nom de plume for Fred Espenak, a retired professor of astrophysics who worked at the Goddard Space Flight Center. But he is far better known for his work on eclipse predictions. To be sure, he has earned the title of mystery eclipse. But in the late 19th century, there was a man who, during his time, could have also been branded as mystery eclipse. His name was Theodor Ritter von Oppolzer, which you probably have never even heard of. From medicine to astronomy. Born in Prague, Czechoslovakia, October 26, 1841, Oppolzer's father Johann was a highly regarded surgeon, and his mother Maria was the daughter of a chemist. In 1850, the family moved to Vienna, and it was there that young Theodor attended school, and it was soon realized that he had an exceptional talent for numbers and mathematics. While his father encouraged him to follow in his footsteps to study medicine, Theodor's primary interest was in physical sciences, most notably astronomy. Although he received a PhD in medicine at the age of 23, the name of Oppolzer was becoming much better known in astronomy thanks to his publishing of technical papers concerning the orbits of various asteroids and comets. He was only 21 when he published the first paper concerning the orbit of Comet Thatcher, a bright comet that appeared in 1861 and we know today is responsible for the meteoroids that produce the annual April-Lyrid meteor shower. Now, again, there are shooting stars, there are comets, there are meteors, but remember that there is a phenomenon. There's you, and in between that phenomenon and you, there is the snake that quickly sprouts up and says, no, this is what's happening. Oh, no, what you're looking at is this. Oh, actually, what's happening is this. So you have to move the snake to the side and just look at it and say, how could I explain this from a biblical point of view? Because one thing I'll tell you for sure is with shooting stars and comets or whatever else, they actually disprove the heliocentric model. And it's a very simple test because not a single time will you ever see a shooting star or a comet or whatever the other object flying through the sky going above the horizon, meaning from the horizon upward into the sky. You always see them going from top down or across the sky and disintegrating to some degree. So what does that tell you? What does that tell you, folks? When science, quote unquote, science is telling you that you're on a ball with no objective up or down, it's all relative, and you're flying through space and through this void, and the solar system's also flying through space like this, and the galaxy's doing its own thing, so you're just hurtling around through space. That in all of the time that we've ever observed the skies, there has never been recorded a meteor or a comet or a shooting star go upwards from the horizon, which it should if you're on a ball spinning around in space in so many different directions. Do you understand? Because it's not limited to this way, right? It could go this way, that way, diagonal this way. You never see them going upwards from the horizon. Whereas you should see them. You always see meteor showers and everything going downwards from the sky. You never see them going upwards. Not a single time. And you should, because if the Earth is in a three-dimensional void flying around, then projectiles should be coming from all sorts of directions. They should be coming from top down, across, bottom up, and yet you never see these things. So, yet again, natural phenomenon, if you take the snake, you say, no, just move to the side for a second, and you just look at it, it actually disproves their model, but they're very quick to tell you what's happening. I don't know if this Theodore guy was a secret society member, but again, you know how satanic the 1800s were. At the very least, he was deceived. But either way, he made some calculations that later were ripped off by NASA. Moving on. In 1866, he began teaching theoretical astronomy and geodesics at the University of Vienna. But not only did he prove that he was a highly proficient calculator, he reputedly memorized the values of 14,000 logarithms. Opolzer also made astronomical observations directly from his own private observatory in Vienna, Josefstadt. Equipped with a revolving dome, a 7-inch refracting telescope, a wide-field comet seeker, and a meridian circle, Opolzer was literally a one-man show. Again, this to me it's a red flag of like propped up. Just like Einstein, just like Cavendish, just like Espinac. It's that lone genius that's in his lab and he figured it all out for you. Just believe it. Being able to not only observe asteroids and comets, but then derive orbits from them as well. In fact, in 1870, he published a paper which brought him international fame, creating a new method for computing an orbit from only 3 or 4 observed positions. The speed in which Opolzer's methodology provided a solution supplanted a more tedious procedure derived by the now legendary German mathematician Carl Gauss. There he is. And I think I had some other stuff highlighted here somewhere. Unwarranted criticism. Today, however, many criticize Opolzer's canon primarily because of the inaccuracy of the solar eclipse tracks that were plotted in the back of his book on 160 dish-shaped maps, all centered on the North Pole and bounded by a latitude 30 degrees south. 3 and occasionally 4 precisely computed points were plotted with a circular arc drawn through the points, providing a good but not exact approximation of the true path. So, was it an exact result? No, it was not. As a result, notable discrepancies often result. For example, for many years up until about the mid-1960s, when more accurate references sources became available, it was assumed that New York City would witness a total eclipse of the sun on April 8, 2024. That assumption was based solely on Opolzer's canon, which depicted the path of that recent total solar eclipse passing directly over the metropolitan area. Many 20th century astronomy books, as well as articles in newspapers and magazines during that era, stressed this point. But the truth of the matter was that on the eclipse day, the path of totality passed about 200 miles to the city's northwest, with New Yorkers having to settle instead for a large partial eclipse. Many other eclipse paths in the canon were found to be off by up to a few hundred miles. So, was Opolzer and his team to blame for such discrepancies? The answer is most definitely not. Opolzer himself wrote that, quote, "These charts have only one purpose, to show at a glance the eclipse path and especially where the computed points lie. It is clear that the circular arcs are approximations. However, it must not be forgotten that there can often be a considerable deviation for places lying far from the principal points." Why? Well, then that means your math model is wrong. if there's a deviation of 200 miles, especially on a local plane with local light sources, that's significant. So it tells you that your model, there's something not right about it. Just like the Gregorian calendar has to intercalate. It's not the real calendar, is it? It can be accurate, but the fact that you have to intercalate tells you that you're not using the real calendar. We talk about that in the Sabbath number 5 episode. So this is something that not a lot of people don't know about, that NASA ripped off calculations from a previous guy, which again, they weren't even that accurate. They were good estimates, but they weren't exact, which tells you that the model that they're working on is not the true model. Now, let's read a little bit more this is from nasa.gov. Let's see what we have. Eclipses and the Saros. The periodicity and recurrence of eclipses is governed by the Saros cycle, a period of approximately 6,585.3 days, 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. It was known to the Chaldeans, i.e. the Babylonians, as a period when lunar eclipses seem to repeat themselves, but the cycle is applicable to solar eclipses as well. God's universe is harmonious, folks. The 2 great lights in the sky have certain cycles that they go through, and the people who watch the sky, i.e. the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, they knew about these various cycles. They give you the math breakdown, and they seduce you with some charts here. Here's a ball Earth and tell you this is how it works, and so on. And again, this doesn't make any sense. But anyway, these are supposedly the various eclipse patterns where you have the moon. I don't understand how this could work on a heliocentric model. This to me refutes it. Because again, remember, they also go the other way too. You see, they also go crisscross. So that doesn't make sense. That does not make sense if they're going up and down the latitudes, and then also, the latitude going up north from south to north doesn't make sense. If the moon is going around the Earth like this, it should have a predictable eclipse pattern, not one that's going downward, then the next time it's going lower than that, then lower than that, then it's going across and upward. That doesn't make any sense. The moon must be doing all kinds of things around your ball Earth if that's the case. Historically speaking, the word Saros derives from the Babylonian term Sar, which is an interval of 3,600 years. It was never used as an eclipse period until English astronomer Edmund Halley adopted it in 1691. According to R.H. van Gent, Halley, quote, extracted it from the lexicon of the 11th century Byzantine scholar Suidas, who in turn erroneously linked it to an unnamed 223-month Babylonian eclipse period mentioned by Pliny the Elder in his Historia Naturalis. So, Pliny the Elder mentioned some unit of time that the Babylonians were tracking for a 223-month eclipse period, who was then requoted in an 11th century Byzantine work by a man named Suidas, and then who was basically requoted yet again by Edmund Halley in 1691. So the Saros term doesn't come from the Babylonians this is an important point we're going to make this in just a second, because people who are defending the globe Earth say, oh, you see, the flat earthers are refuted because they're wrong about the Saros cycle. No, we're not wrong. I'm not a flat earther, but we're not wrong about the Saros cycle and how the Babylonians knew these periods. They didn't call them the Saros cycle. So the confusion is because the word Saros was attributed by various people throughout history. The Babylonians never used the Saros cycle, but they knew the period of time of these intervals for lunar eclipses because they were all about the moon. In fact, in one of my, I think it was episode number, was it somewhere in the lunar eclipse? Yeah, the number 5, where we talk about the calendar, the true calendar. Sabbath series number 5, episode number 5. We talk about how it is plainly evident that the Jews got their evening to evening reckoning from Babylon. This whole idea of the Sabbath starting from evening to evening is a Babylonian tradition. And you can prove that very clearly because the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, they all had a daylight reckoning of the day. The Romans had a complicated calendar, but either way, all the cultures, the Persians, the Greeks, the Egyptians, all reckoned the day according to the sun. It was the Babylonians that reckoned the day according to the moon. They were all about the moon. So they knew lunar eclipse periods, all these things. They were very much watching the sky because they were doing astrology and all kinds of things, right? That's very well documented in the Bible and in history. This is another one from nasa.gov. Eclipse predictions and Earth's rotation. Fred Espenak, our hero mystery eclipse. Let's see what he has to say. When Sir Isaac Newton first published his revolutionary theory of gravitation in Principia, 1687, it laid the groundwork for the prediction of planetary motion throughout the solar system. Edmund Halley played a pivotal role in motivating Newton to develop this mathematical description of gravity. In fact, Halley even financed much of Principia's publication costs. I wonder if Halley was also an occultist, a mystic, or a secret society member. Something to look into. Halley was quite curious about the orbits of the planets. Using Newton's Principia, Halley calculated orbits for the comets of 1531, 1607, and 1681, and discovered that they must be successive returns of the same object. He correctly predicted that the comet would return in 1758, and it has been known as Halley's Comet ever since. He also devised a method to determine Earth's distance from the Sun using the rare transits of Venus across the Sun's disk. Although not as well known, Halley also made important scientific contributions in his studies of eclipses. He is credited with the first eclipse map, showing the path of the moon's shadow across England during the upcoming total eclipse of 1715. He also rediscovered the Saros cycle of 18 years plus 10 or 11 days, depending on the number of intervening leap years, over which eclipse seemed to repeat. Now again, remember, when they say 18 years plus or minus X amount of days, they're using the Gregorian calendar, which is not the true calendar. The true calendar is the sun's position in the constellations. And an entire solar year, which is 365.24 days or whatever, it goes through all 12 of the constellations, completing one cycle. You don't need to intercalate. And I talk about that in my Sabbath series, number 5, because we talk about the lunar Sabbath and why it's wrong. And that's a deep dive into all this stuff with the calendar. So the Saros cycle, as they define it, is still wrong in that sense. But it is, I'm sure it's a fixed number according to the true calendar that is probably close to that number, because the Gregorian calendar is close to the truth. But again, it's right and almost right. The counterfeit is almost right. Moving on. The Saros was used by the Chaldeans and the Babylonians and later the Greeks for simple lunar eclipse predictions, but it was unknown in Halley's day. So Espenak knows where this was originally used by the ancients. Using Newton's theory of the moon's motion and the Saros cycle, Halley made a series of calculations to identify ancient eclipses in the literature. But Halley soon encountered a problem. The eclipse paths he predicted were shifted with respect to the historical records. Either the moon was accelerating in its orbit or the Earth's rotation rate was slowing down. Now, which one do you think that is? Although both are actually true, Halley correctly identified the increasing length of the day as the primary culprit. It took another 300 years to understand why. So, yeah, notice how they are saying that the Earth is slowing down and all these things to gaslight you into what's actually happening, which is that you have a flat and motionless Earth. This has been proven. And you have local luminaries on their own cycles and probably doing their own thing. I'm sure that the moon and the sun are, if we do perceive the day as increasing or decreasing, then yeah, those objects in the sky are doing something different. And they've been doing something. The Earth is not changing in its rotation. That's for darn sure. This is now an apology article by, of course, these, the Flat Earth Wiki or the Flat Earth, the flatearth.ws. Flat Earthers claim the usage of the Babylonian term Saros proves that the eclipses are predicted using ancient Babylonian technology. In reality, the Saros is now used to classify related eclipses. For example, the solar eclipse on August 21, 2017 is the 22nd member out of the 77 in the solar Saros 145, which, by the way, remember that one in 2017. We'll look at some articles in the next section. They totally messed up, and it freaked everybody out because they had to expand the size of the sun. And of course, that changes your whole model, and it was a whole debacle. And we'll look at that article. They don't mention that here, though. The term Saros was first used in association with eclipse by Edmund Halley, which, remember, he borrowed it from other Greek documenters and philosophers who borrowed it from others. So translating it through time, the Babylonians did not use that term, but they used the counting system of counting eclipses and keeping track of them. The Babylonians never used the term Saros to describe eclipses. Yeah, true. And the numbering system of the Saros series was created by G. Van debris. Of course, they're quickly telling you what's happening and quickly, taking advantage of people's ignorance, because it's true that, yes, the Babylonians did not use the term saros. That's true. And they're capitalizing on that truth to lie to you that, then therefore, what's the therefore? The therefore is that, well, they were never in connection with Babylonian information or anything else, which is not true. The Babylonians, the Greeks, and the Persians, the Assyrians have been calculating the eclipses and the movements of the heavens since they were an empire, because that's the knowledge that was continued after the flood. And of course, these people were using it for predictions and astronomy and astrology and all sorts of things that you already know. This is from The Atlantic, and it's a funny article. It says, astronomers are using ancient eclipse records to solve a cosmic mystery. Babylonian tablets suggest that the Earth's rotation is slowing less than expected. On the morning of April 15th, 136 BC, residents of the ancient city of Babylon in what is now Iraq experienced quite a sight. An hour and a half after sunrise, the moon moved across the face of the sun, blotting it out, so only the golden halo of its atmosphere was visible. The sky went dark. Venus, Mercury, and the normal stars were visible. Jupiter and Mars, which were in their period of disappearance, were visible in that eclipse. A Babylonian astrologer inscribed in cuneiform on a key tablet now stored in the British Museum. To measure the eclipse's duration, the astrologer would have used a cylindrical vessel called a clepsydra, or a water clock, whose slow draining marked the passage of time. Quote, it moved from southwest to northeast, 35 time duration, units of time duration, for obscuration and clearing up. In that eclipse, north wind, which, and the rest of it is missing chunks, basically. They can't tell what it says after that. But the astrologer may have been noting that the wind shifted direction, which happens during a total eclipse, which is also interesting because, again, where does the wind come from? Where does the wind come from? You ever wonder that? You ever, like, when you walk outside and there's wind going past your face, like, where's the fan that is blowing this? We live in an electromagnetic universe that is very well designed. It's very well timed. Everything is on clocks. Everything has certain rules with itself, and certainly the luminaries play a big role in that. A little more to go here. This account, one of the most precise eclipse records from antiquity, is more than a souvenir from the sands of Babylon. In a remarkable example of science being practiced across millennia, today's astronomers are using it to show that Earth's rotation is slowing down and the day is getting shorter, but not as much as we might expect. So, did the Babylonians keep track of eclipses? Yes, they did. They had very meticulous records because that's all they did is they look at the sky. They didn't have the internet. Here's another one from NPR. Ancient Babylonians brought light to mysterious eclipses. Tomorrow the great, this is the host speaking, tomorrow the great American eclipse will sweep across North America. Millions will experience total darkness. I believe, what's the date to this? This is, April 7th, 2024. It's an eerie and mysterious experience, even though at this point we know exactly what is happening. Do you? I don't think you do. I think if you knew, you would marvel and give glory to God and worship God, not be a liberalistic, atheistic station that you are. The moon will be passing in front of the sun, casting a shadow over the earth. But imagine that you lived in the ancient world with no warning that an eclipse was going to happen, as the sun's disk suddenly disappeared and the day fell dark and cool. Unsurprisingly, in the ancient world, eclipses were often seen as bad omens. That was true in Mesopotamia, the region that today includes Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, and Turkey. But even then, ancient Mesopotamian astronomers were looking for other explanations. They kept detailed records of celestial movement, and the people of Mesopotamia, the Babylonians and the Assyrians, were the first to figure out that eclipses occur in cycles, meaning that it could be predicted. Eckhart Fromm is a professor of Assyriology at Yale University, and he joins us now. So he goes on to interview this person, and they go on and talk about the eclipses. So, conclusion. Well, NASA's role from the very beginning has been associated to the occult and to deception. That's why America is the false prophet, and why I quote it from the book of Revelation in the introduction to this series. The moon landing initiated people into the Masonic ideal of evolution, transhumanism, climate change, Gnostic spiritual beliefs, New Age, all this stuff, basically a universe without God, where man is the God of the universe. Just in time for things like quantum physics, all the false light shifts that were happening that we've talked about, and the ecumenical globalist movements, climate change, the idea of worldwide Earth citizens, all of these things came as a result of NASA creating this hoax, and the hoaxes that give power and life to ultimately this image that would come around. It also gave atheism a justification, which is another interesting thread, because by having all of this space exploration, the atheists now could say, look, there's space, and we live in a void, and evolution's true, and the Big Bang is true, and we don't need God in our model. And of course, atheism was created by the beast to make itself look good. If you don't know what I'm talking about, watch my End Time series, especially the French Revolution episode. I believe it's episode number 14, where we talk about the origins of atheism and communism, and all of these things are designed ultimately to flip from dark to light. The flip you're seeing now from left to right, from atheistic governing to we need religion back, is all by design. So atheism is on it's on an expiration date, and atheism is soon going to be serving its purpose to point to the morality of the beast as superior. That's what atheism was. But atheism was given life because of these wonders, so that ultimately religion could look good when atheism has served its purpose. Today, NASA is continuing its false signs and wonders, so that all of these new lies and ongoing lies, which you'll see in the final section, we'll look at current events, that all of these things have power and magical authority in your mind. Of course, if you know the truth, which you do now, hopefully, those things will not have any sway over you whatsoever. So when we read those current events, you'll see that they are just going to fall on deaf ears because they're fakery. But if you believe in the heliocentric model, all of the current event articles that I'm going to read to you in the next section are there to push you in one direction, whether towards fear or desire. The big bad asteroid is going to come and kill us, so we need to unite the world and create some sort of, anti-asteroid task force. Or, look, we're going to transcend space, so let's unite the world and live forever and travel through space. So either fear or desire, doesn't matter. The devil's always using his dualistic schemes. And the point is to push you off the narrow road, to push you off of critical thinking, that you're not sober-minded so that you can be devoured. That's the point. NASA's budget is enormous. They have billions and billions of dollars of free money that they could basically use for all their shenanigans. And of course, other people have followed suit now. You can see India, China, they're all, Japan is all drinking the Kool-Aid with rovers on the moon and all these things. And of course, we'll see some of those articles in the next section, but they're just such nonsense. And you know that they're lying, so that what the natural conclusion is, okay, I know that NASA is lying. So when you see people like China and Japan and India pulling the same shenanigans, you know that they're lying, which tells you that means they're all in on it, which is just such a profound thought to believe that so many people are in on such a profoundly important deception, which means that, wow, the devil really does control this world. He is the God of this world in that sense. Today, the whole Mars thing with the Elon Musk and going to Mars, this is just moon landing 2.0, folks. Again, every lie that the devil creates has an expiration date. Eventually, it's found out. So the momentum, he needs to continue the momentum and pass the baton from one place to another and keep the lie going and creating and repackaging the lie, basically. But that's why the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. You can spend probably every day debunking NASA's stuff. And ultimately, I'm not going to do that. The point with all this is to show you that there is no way you can divorce the occult from heliocentrism. And this section specifically with NASA is to show you their shenanigans, that they're lying to you, obviously lying about everything. There's no truth from NASA whatsoever. Their sole job is to spin reality in a particular way so that the lie of uniting the world under the beast seems like a good idea. That idea, whether it manifests through climate change, AI, whatever else, has a reason to be justified because the quote-unquote science of heliocentrism, proven to you, quote-unquote proven by NASA, has supported it and given it life. That's their role. A lot of flat earthers, I should say every quote-unquote flat earther, is aware of NASA and their shenanigans and their snakery. But what they're not aware of is the final step, which is that NASA is part of the false prophet, Why are all these things happening? Just to deceive you and make money? No, it's not just that. It's ultimately because NASA is part of the false prophet, and America has been ruled by the Jesuits and the Roman power, for a while, since 1870, right after the Civil War. America has been doing the bidding of the beast for a long time. And now, as we close in on the final moments of history, America's job is to give life to this image, which is the government that will take over the world, the New World Order. That's America's job. So that's the part that the flat earthers aren't putting together. So you need to go one step further and realize from a biblical perspective how to interpret these things, not just from a science perspective or from a conspiracy perspective. Those things can be useful, but really if you haven't gotten to the point of seeing how this ties in with the Bible and Bible prophecy, then you have to take that extra step. Heliocentrism was weaponized by Rome in the Counter-Reformation. It's been weaponized, as you hopefully saw, and it's designed to ultimately bring the world to serve the beast, just like the Bible tells you. Remember that Satan gave his power to the Catholic Church. The false prophet is going to make people worship this system through obedience and by working many deceptions. Remember all of the narratives from episode 1 of this series that are linked to heliocentrism. Science fiction, evolution, atheism, transhumanism, New Age, quantum craziness, climate change, fear of destruction through AI, all of these things, aliens, UFOs, are linked to the cosmology that you are taught from kindergarten. And so this thing is very ingrained, and it's designed ultimately to subvert your faith and have ecumenical consequences. So now that you've seen through NASA's shenanigans, it's time for our final section to catch up with everything and look at current events.